I thought something would happen. Rock and roll played for the first time in public middle school 4, but not a damn thing happened. Hello everybody and welcome. I'm CG and it's an absolute delight to have you here. Today we're taking a deep dive into 20th Century Boys by Naoki Urasawa. Your eyes do not deceive you, this is a long video, and I'm using the space to take my time to go through this series. That flows through to the introduction as well. I understand not everyone enjoys consuming content this way, or might just want to jump straight into talking about the series, so here are the different sections of the video. If you want to take it a chunk at a time, or just jump straight ahead, go for it. Timestamps are in the description as well. My only recommendation would be to watch through the biases and bases section first, so you understand the context and the scope of this analysis. It also lays out the other series that we're going to parallel to later on, and I would be remiss not to notify you of what they are. I would hate for you to dive into a section only to be met by spoilers for another series. I also want to cut off anyone who's come here without at the very least trying the series for themselves. If your plan is to watch this and then go read the series, please don't. I'm going to be pretty straight up with the things that happen and the reveals, so you'll miss out on a lot of what makes 20th Century Boys a beloved story. For example, I'm going to tell you who Friend is well before he's revealed in the series. Please don't ruin that for yourself. There's your forewarnings. This project differs to a lot of other content on the channel currently. Normally we slice off a certain part of a manga to look at a time, whether it be a certain arc, a certain perspective on an arc, or just trying to find the overall themes and messages of a story. The closest we've come to something of this magnitude was looking at Another Monster, the sequel novel to Monster, also by Naoki Urasawa. However, that was more an attempt to catch people up on and re-presentation of the content rather than a proper analysis of the content. The latter is what we'll be doing here today. We will also be going through the story as well, so for those who haven't read it in a hot minute, you're going to get a pretty extensive catch-up. What we want to do is look at and discuss the various strengths and weaknesses of 20th Century Boys, praising it for the things that it does well, but also acknowledging the places where it does stumble. Already, this should ring some warning bells for you on the whole dreaded objective-subjective debate, whether a piece of art fails certain objective metrics, or if the only thing that matters is how it resonates with its individuals as its audience. In any sort of long-form criticism, this is an idea thrown around quite often, so I thought it would be a good spot to insert some perspectives from videos of other creators that I watch.
I need y'all to understand something. The only thing that's objective when it comes to anime and manga is what happens in the series and what the author says about said series. Whether this series is better than another is completely subjective. There is no math equation, there is nothing that goes into it that you can say, oh, this factually makes this series better than another. Because at the end of the day, that's all based off of interpretation and regardless, enjoyment.
So yes, objectivity and subjectivity. At this point, the concept has practically drawn a line between two types of critical analysis. The issue is that many content creators will blend the two ideas and then hide under the banner of subjectivity to avoid criticism. It's a fantastic tool for the modern analyst. It's like a free pass. You don't have to do any work on your script at that point because it can't be wrong. It's all just an opinion. How you feel may remain with you, but that doesn't mean you should stop listening to other people, exploring the content with any depth, or allowing yourself to experience even more.
That's Masked Man and Mauler respectively. Their links will be in the description and I can happily recommend their content. I want to follow on from their comments. This analysis will be based around my own reading of 20th Century Boys. I will be doing my best to make my points with relevant objective references to the manga. If I do miss things that contradict my points, please do not hesitate to point them out. I don't want to present an unfair analysis. On top of that, much of the discussion around how well elements of the series are achieved will be inherently subjective. We each have our own preconceptions coming into a series, our own experiences both in life and what we've read. I know for myself, my opinion on this series has changed considerably since the first time I read through as an early teenager. I had changed coming back to this series, and as such, found that it hit differently. Different moments were suddenly far more real. Moments I may have previously brushed aside were suddenly getting an emotional reaction from me. Likewise, problems that I had ignored were suddenly obvious, and I went through the series looking for answers. All that to say, you come to a series as yourself, and I'm not here to claim my opinions as facts. Neither am I here to change your mind on this series. Rather to simply lay out my thoughts on 20th Century Boys, and why I have come to those conclusions. On critiques broadly, one of the downfalls about shorter videos on a topic is that they generally create a narrative and then try to spin it. E.g., this manga is a masterpiece and here's why, or man, this certainly didn't live up to the hype and here's why. Then the whole video comes at the series from that angle. Now, I'm not trying to be some enlightened centrist here, it's much easier to break up discussions like this, and I do it myself. Generally, these come from quite a kind and honest place. The series has evoked a strong reaction from you, you've had a strong experience, and want others to share in that. I only want to say that these can lead to a hyperbolic message that can end up doing the exact opposite of what you wanted. I know for me, when I first read through Hunter x Hunter, everyone and their mother was telling me that this was the best thing since sliced bread. It set unrealistic expectations and made my first read-through of that series an absolute disaster. A series that I now actually enjoy was completely spoiled by being overhyped. I know for one of the friends of the channel, they had the same experience with Monster, and that sucks. As a big fan of that series, it's disappointing to see the passion of the community backfire. Again, I'm also no saint in this. Sometimes you get passionate about the things you love, and you need to express that. My point is this: you can love a series, have a deep, life-altering experience reading it, but please never assert that it's flawless. Recognize that the series may have been perfect for you, but flaws can always be found with someone coming at the series from a different angle. Recognizing the flaws in the things we love doesn't need to weaken our appreciation in the series overall. Rather, it helps create a more realistic view of said series for people to draw their own conclusions. That's my intention here today with 20th Century Boys. I want to praise it for the things it does well, but also to discuss its shortcomings. Whether or not these positives outweigh the negatives or vice versa is up to you, but as fans of manga, we shouldn't be afraid to acknowledge the triumphs of series we dislike and the missteps of those that we love. Let's get back to that menu and lay out the video. This is the introduction. Shortly, we're going to break into setting the stage, the core background of 20th Century Boys, and the general opinions on the series as a whole. Then biases and bases. This is included to give you a guide of where I'm coming from personally with the review and what the analysis will be based upon, including the other Urasawa stories that we'll be referencing. This all broadly makes up part 1 of the analysis. Part 2 is a recap of and dive into each part of the series sequentially. These will be broken up by the major arcs. Firstly, the Book of Prophecy, the first 50 chapters, quickly going through those plot beats and then looking at why it works, taking the time to look at world building in particular. Then the new Book of Prophecy, chapters 50 through 169, taking this part more sequentially, commenting on things as they come up in the story. And then the End of the World, chapters 170 through 249, including 21st Century Boys. Again, taking the same approach. Part 3 is picking out some broader topics to talk about. Namely, we're going to roll straight into discussing the ending in 21st Century Boys, then magic, friend, and the ending. These topics all sort of bleed together just due to the kind of series that this is. Since we're putting friend in part 3, we won't talk about him much in part 2, likewise saving a lot of that ending discussion as well. Finally, part 4 will be my honest thoughts, summing up the series as a whole, and then wrapping up the video itself. It should be noted that when it comes to analysing this series, there is one aspect that turns the task nightmarish. This story is 249 chapters long, plus 21st Century Boys, all chock-filled with content. So much of this story is relevant, so much sets up plot beats later on in the story, so many concepts are pulled through, so often are we treated with character interactions that seem so fleeting, that are actually really important for the development of the characters later on. As such, there will be things that I miss, or pieces that I will overlook for the sake of brevity. You can tell from the length of the video, that's really important to me. I will be focusing on what I think are the real core aspects of this story, but simply due to the series' scope, it will not get close to comprehensive. I hope you understand. I'm also going to be keeping a list of iconic scenes and my favorite scenes, just because there happens to be a lot of moments to sit back and say, yeah, that was awesome. I want to finish this introduction by saying this is a big project for me. Thank you for supporting me with it. There is so much in this series that at times it gets hard to balance it all. I hope I can do it some justice. From here on, the spoilers start. Now let's crack in. 20th Century Boys is a seinen manga written by Naoki Urasawa between 2000 and 2006. It totals 249 chapters and led right into a short epilogue series, 21st Century Boys, released the following year in 2007. The story revolves around a group of friends who have a childhood connection to this ominous figure known as Friend. Friend is doing some dodgy stuff, so the main cast are part convinced, part forced into action against this shadowy figure. The story jumps in time between the main narrative that we're following back to the characters' childhoods. Each time, the flashbacks giving us more information around what's happening or developing the characters further. As the series continues, we also jump forward in time, picking up with the narrative years later after some really massive societal changes. The series was met with a lot of love. Urasawa had already proven himself a master of the craft in his previous work of Monster, and 20th Century Boys was likewise very well received. The series was quickly labelled with a lot of 9s and 10 out of 10s by both reviewers and readers at large, some even heralding it as a masterpiece of manga. It also managed to sweep up some manga awards both locally in Japan and internationally. Its popularity led to a series of live-action movies, released between 2008 and 2009. Despite manga live-actions having a particularly bad reputation, Urasawa's style is rather cinematic, so it wasn't a hard one to adapt. Good chunks of the movies are shot-for-shot remakes of the original. However, when it came to reviews, the live-actions were not nearly as beloved. The movies make a lot of changes and removals from the manga, some for shortening length, and most that actually do hurt the impact of the series overall. It also, I believe, unintentionally relies on having read the manga to understand what's happening, with valuable context moments having to be removed for the sake of time. So the movies were met with fairly low reviews and mostly forgotten. The last major piece of 20th Century Boys came in 2018 with the perfect edition of the Kanzenbans being released. This made the manga widely available and easy to get your hands on. Urasawa is notoriously in favour of hard copy releases only. The perfect edition is essentially a cleaned reprint of the complete edition of the series, something that the publisher has been doing with other Urasawa stories. Though, that complete edition also does something that I'm honestly shocked more people aren't talking about. But we'll come to that later on. Let's change tack here and talk about the state of reviews for 20th Century Boys. So yes, reviews for 20th Century Boys are overwhelmingly positive. Many point to the strong core cast of characters, the mystery surrounding the villain, and the rich narrative that stays cohesive across 4 different timelines as its main strengths. The main thrill of the series is the mystery of Friend, and that's highly engaging. The twists and turns in the mystery come at a good pace, and they keep you on the edge of your seat. Though I would be remiss not to note that the majority of reviews are spoiler-free, taking a general or entry-level perspective on the series rather than how its latter chapters affect the series overall. Digging a bit deeper, you'll find few have taken the form of a spoiler review. When discussing the ending with spoilers, still the majority of people hold the series as brilliant. However, there is a sentiment that the series falls in quality the longer it goes on. While still a very good series overall, it fails to relive the highs of those first 50 chapters. This extends to the ending, which seems to be the main point of contention. The final reveal of Friend's identity is probably the most polarizing part of this series. Some find it disappointing and out of left field, while others praised it as a thematically appropriate bookend to the series. Urasawa endings have always been rather contentious, and I have no doubt that they will continue to be. Monster's ending was also felt to be rather underwhelming compared to what the series has built up. Urasawa's next series in Pluto met a similar response, likewise the series after that, Billy Bat. 20th Century Boys is no different, and the final reveals are part of the reason why I've had to break the ending discussion into 2 parts. Despite those criticisms, 20th Century Boys is still generally viewed as a masterwork, a series that tells a compelling story and uses the power of the medium to great effect, the art and the story going hand in hand to deliver something both entertaining and impactful, a gripping story that is not quickly forgotten. I think this is a crucial step in providing context for any long-form review. Knowing where I'm coming from, what I focus on, what I want from my manga, will give you a good guide to set your responses from. Oh, he cares a lot about world building and I don't. He'll probably be more critical about things that I'd consider unimportant. This also works the other way around. For things I care less about, like thematic consistencies, I might let things slide that are real sticking points for you. Hopefully, this section will help explain a bit about where my opinions are coming from. I am an Urasawa fan. I sadly can't say I'm a big fan yet because my dive into Urasawa has been purely his big series, plus Another Monster and the start of Asadora. But I am a fan nonetheless. Monster was the manga that got younger me into a world much bigger than shonen, much bigger than the Dragon Ball, Narutos, and Shaman Kings of the world. I hold everything I've read by Urasawa in really high regard, and he is one of, if not my favorite mangaka. I find his art and paneling style incredibly engaging, and I think he makes really strong, character-led journeys. As far as his series go, I will admit I am a little protective over Billy Bat. I think that series is much better than its current perception, and I'm disappointed seemingly so few people have actually read it, so I will most likely be praising Billy Bat in comparison more than is fair. I will do my best to keep that in check. Characters are generally my main focus in a series. I would rather a character have strong internal motivations rather than just following the whims of some theme. That's not to say a character can't do both, but I focus more on individual journeys rather than the overall message. The better developed a character is, the more invested I become in a story, and the longer that story will stay with me. I think one of Urasawa's biggest strengths is quickly establishing strong characters, which is a major reason why I enjoy his work so much. I also do care a lot about world building. You can do anything you want with a world, go crazy with it, as long as it's consistent. I don't need brandy, sandy levels of world building as long as the rules are established and always applied. If your world is completely new, establish the rules that the world abides by. If your world is Earth with some changes, make us aware of what the changes are and how they fit. In this case, besides from those changes, we should expect things to flow like our own history. Good world building helps us understand the greater context of a story. Without this, events can feel incredibly contrived, like the author is just making things happen and you have to accept that, which can lead to some incredibly awkward moments. Take the ending of Fallout 3, for example.
When you go to ask Fox to stop the purifier from exploding, he tells you that this is your destiny. Like legit, this guy is immune to radiation. He cannot die from this. And he tells you, nah, you gotta do this, man. This is your destiny, dude. You gotta do this. Like, the ending cinematic even goes, but the Vault Dweller did not follow in his father's footsteps. He was not brave enough, and instead sent in a true hero to stop the purifier from exploding. My guy, the true hero is immune to radiation. How does this make me less of a hero? It just makes me smart. Next you'll tell me that I've been in a coma for 60 years and my son is now the bad guy.
If you don't properly set up the world, important moments like this can fall completely short. What about length of a series? I'm of the opinion that a story should be as long as needed to appropriately tell your story. Some stories are intended as really long and they indulge themselves in that length. Hajime no Ippo is a good example of this. It's a really great series that happens to be incredibly long, but such is the style of the story being told. For the most part, I'm more inclined to praise a series that effectively communicates its story in as few chapters as possible. The longer something goes on, the more chance the reader has to lose interest. Likewise, the more chances you have to start fumbling the story that had been crafted so well. Finally, art. This analysis will generally be more concerned with the story, as there's only so many times I can say, oh, look how good Urasawa's art is. There will be times that we go into looking at iconic shots, but for the most part, the underlying assumption is that the art and panel compositions are just really well done. Urasawa has this nice cinematic style, and at no point does the series stray from his usual quality standard. In preparation for this video, I have read 20th Century Boys through completely 3 times, including 21st Century Boys. The first time was a genuine reread of a series that I hadn't picked up in a long time. The second, slowly going through, having the full context of the entire series. And finally, a third time after writing the bulk of this analysis to pick up anything that I might have missed in the previous 2 passes, as a form of checking my own work. Also, a quick couple of rereads through certain sections just to get a better context of those scenes. Please also note that the majority of this video is based upon the original edition of the series. Most of the changes, whatever and however many they may be in the perfect edition, we are not looking at today. For the sake of comparison, I've also gone through Urasawa's other most popular series. This included a full reread of Pluto, a series that I hadn't gone through in a while, and quicker passes through Monster and Billy Bat. I'm comfortable doing quicker rereads of those series because I'm a lot more familiar with them. As we go through this analysis, I will be making references to those series without regard to spoilers. I would highly recommend reading each of them if you haven't already. They are each very good, and a fan of 20th Century Boy or no, you will most likely find some value in them. I also went through the 3 live-action movies and will be making comparisons to them as well. There are some really key moments, particularly near the end, that are changed. This gives us an interesting comparison point because we can directly compare how a scene would have played out should it have been done like the live-action version. Let me preface this next part by saying, yes, the movies are a wholly inferior way of telling this story. However, there are changes that could be considered improvements on the manga, but we'll get to them. Likewise, some moments are easily elevated from the manga simply by having the musical accompaniment. That's all for context. It's time to get into the meat and potatoes. So sit back, relax, grab a snack if you'd like, and let's crack in. The opening chapter of 20th Century Boys is one of the most detail-laden openings I've ever read. The story opens in 1973, with Kenji taking over the school radio to play rock and roll. He thinks something will happen, the power of rock and roll, but nothing happened. But nothing is shown to us to have happened. Immediately, we time skip ahead to the year 2001, with the UN praising a group of people for saving the world. Then we jump again to Kana waking up to the robot outside her window, saying, "Not that, again." We don't actually know yet, but this is another time jump. Only after all of that does the series really start. Urasawa has just set up some sinister threads before even giving us a main character to follow. Let's lay out all the major plot points that this first chapter sets up. A group of people save the world in the year 2000. There's a giant robot-looking thing that's going to happen, and then happen again. There's a deadly virus outbreak in the news. Kenji's sister left her baby with him and his mother and then ran off somewhere. A local robotics professor has gone missing. There was this familiar symbol outside the professor's home. Kenji is now suspicious because of seeing that symbol. The same symbol was made up by Kenji and his friends when they were kids, and there is a man known as Friend using that symbol, leading a group of people and can quote-unquote float. I promise we're not going to go through every chapter like this, but chapter 1 is important. First impressions matter and can make or break for some readers. It also gives us insight to how well the series is planned out. How much of the series can we already see from just these first pages? So much is established in this first chapter. Besides the major plot points, we also get our first look into our main character, Kenji. We see he's working hard in a very typical life, just a real average Joe trying to provide for his family. We see some history leading his gang of friends. It also sets up this time-jumping mechanic that the series will be using, jumping back into the character's childhood to help explain and explore what's happening in the present. It's a good microcosm of what the series will be like. We're following a mystery around Friend. There's going to be a world-ending threat, we're going to jump backwards and forwards in time, and at the heart of it all is our regular, everyday, normal guy. Also, some neat tidbits. Urasawa has actually mentioned a few things around this opening chapter. That shot of the UN thanking a group of people for help saving the world is actually the basis of the entire series. Urasawa said that he was watching TV in the bath one night when he caught a similar line being said. That gave him the idea, which would eventually work itself through into becoming this series. For that shot of Kana in the opening, that wasn't planned. The panel was included, but Kana's timeskip design hadn't been created yet. Urasawa, as he kept drawing the characters, figured out later that the girl from the opening was Kana, calling it as much a surprise to himself as it was to the readers. Anyways, let's move on. We go on to meet the rest of Kenji's gang, Yoshitsune, Mon, Maruo, Kiryon, Fukube, most reminiscing on their time hanging out as kids. Meanwhile, that overseas virus starts killing people inside Japan, and Friend is repeating lines from the flashbacks, essentially confirming him as connected to Kenji. Then our real inciting incident happens. Donkey, one of the childhood friends, dies after sending a letter to Kenji with the symbol on it. This gets Kenji far more involved in finding out the truth, and leads to the gang unearthing their time capsule to find their symbol once again. Sometime later, we meet Yukiji, the assassin guy, God, Manjom, and f*** me, I'm just realizing this whole video is going to be me struggling to pronounce the names. I'm going to be using shortened versions for some of them. Anyways, things start to really change when a Friend defector comes to God's community. He confirms that there is a big conspiracy by Friend to reenact their childhood plans. Kenji goes to assassinate Friend, but it turns out he's Kana's father. Meanwhile, Friend's followers try to steal baby Kana, which leads to Kenji's convenience store being burned to the ground. Among the ashes, Kenji uncovers the Book of Prophecy and confirms the choice to fight back. This is where the series cuts to Ocho's backstory until he makes his way back to Japan. This follows a time skip of 3 years, where the Friend Party had gained political power and made Kenji out to be a terrorist. By the time the new year starts to roll around, Kenji calls his banners. His gang stands united as a mysterious airborne virus starts attacking places around the globe, and a giant robot starts attacking the city. And it time skips. What a power play by Urasawa. Imagine you're writing a series building up to a climax, you've moved all the pieces, you've got tension high, and then you skip right past it. What a bold move, but let's talk about what just happened. This part of the manga is the widening diamond. We start with Kenji in the convenience store and then move out from there. We widen the cast, bringing in all these old friends. We widen the plot, showing how much power Friend has and how devoted his followers are. We widen the world. There's this disease affecting different countries, and apparently magic exists. What Urasawa has done is constructed a wide base from which to build the story from, essentially turning what we thought was the main plot into just the prologue. As its own self-contained story, once again Urasawa has outdone himself with his characters. I think the strongest aspect here is that they're relatable. While there's this main plot around the discovery of Friend, concurrently runs this really interesting take on growing up. The main cast are young adults getting closer to that 30 milestone and struggling with their place in the world. When I first read this as a teenager, a lot of this went over my head, but now a bit older, this becomes a lot more real. We follow Kenji, so let's take it from his perspective. He's getting close to 30 years old, running a convenience store to support himself and his mother. There's nothing particularly special about him. We get a first look at his discontent at Kirian's wedding. As he's belting out karaoke, he thinks, "I'm fine like this. My life is just fine." You could believe him here if you like, but this seems more like Kenji is trying to convince himself of this very thing. We know that this was never Kenji's dream. In college, he wanted to play music to a full Budokan, and back further in childhood, he wanted to one day save the world. Now it seems like he's trying to convince himself that what he's got should be enough for him. It betrays that those dreams are still there, just smothered by the responsibility of the real world. Later on, he gets caught up in the mystery of who this friend could be. Let's skip ahead to where the team uncovers the time capsule. There's a line here that perfectly sums this up. "I wonder if we're the adults now that we dreamed of being back then, or if our childhood selves would laugh at us if they saw us now." This is basically Urasawa hitting us over the head with the theme of these early chapters. The characters have settled for an ordinary life. They're not the hopeful, dreaming kids they used to be. While growing up is generally perceived as a good thing, sometimes we forget things we shouldn't along the way. Some of the kinder innocence killed off by a need to survive in the world. This comes through with Kenji after Yukiji enters the scene. Now these two have a lot more history than what is shown to us yet, but even now we can see that there is a strong historical connection there. This builds into my first favourite moment of the series. Yuki offers the next clue to Kenji. There's a group of parents attempting to sue friend over him luring their kids into his cult. Meanwhile, Kenji's essentially boss has shown up to audit what he's doing. There's this clear moment of Kenji choosing to stay working instead of going to the lawyer. He chooses his responsibilities to his family over the mystery and the intrigue. You could see this as a self-serving action, ignoring those affected parents who he could presumably help. I think this is more a case of Kenji choosing the life he's found himself in and not being willing to chase after this bizarre fantasy. Anyways, Yuki returns and asks why he didn't show, and this is the moment. Yuki starts internally begging that Kenji won't make excuses, that he hasn't changed from the hero that she remembers. And then he does. Yuki makes this comment just beforehand. What always happens when you meet people after so long is disillusionment. You wish you hadn't seen them after all. I find this a really compelling character journey. It's like an inverse coming-of-age story. Rather than becoming older, maturing, and growing into a new identity, it's breaking off the callousness of growing old and embracing the core identity of your youth. This hits its climax after Kenji meets their friend defector and gets the confirmation on what Friend's up to. Friend definitely killed Donkey and plans to go through on all these childhood plans to destroy the world. It's here where Kenji makes the choice to go after Friend. He goes home and he breaks out his guitar. 20th Century Boys is full of iconic moments, those parts which stick with you well after reading it. This I would consider the first of those moments. This is Kenji re-embracing his past and confirming his choice to oppose Friend, and it lands. We spent all the previous chapters seeing Kenji choose his modern convenience store life. Now he's intentionally changing. This is the equivalent of going like Sailor Moon or Super Saiyan. It's Kenji's power-up moment, but purely from a character standpoint. You could also see the guitar as emblematic of his weapon for the rest of the series. It's with his guitar that he will eventually make the biggest impact on the world. But that honestly might be pushing it a little bit. Let's compare how the manga lands the scene with the movies. The movies move this scene to after the attempted Kana kidnapping and the convenience store burning down. This is a significant change. It changes the whole intention around the scene. In the manga, it's built upon a character decision. There is something to lose by going against Friend, but Kenji can't sit idly by. Moving it to after the store burning, it means it's less about choice and more about obligation. There is no longer a place to return to. The boats have been burned, you'll have to push forward regardless. Though the movie does a great job making this moment a montage. It works really well with Kenji just jamming over a recap of the plot. Let's switch tacks to talk about another character. Let's talk about Ocho. He doesn't actually come into the narrative for a while. For most of the early chapters, he's built up as Friend. He's a key person in the group who we haven't seen in the modern day, and he even made the symbol. We learn that he's actually become this bounty hunter-esque figure in Bangkok after fleeing to Tibet. He used to be a successful businessman until the day his son died, his son's death being his major character trigger. What I love is that the series paints it as 100% Ocho's fault. The son mistook another man for his father and ran out into the road after him. The son mistook another man for his father. Ocho was so absent from his son's life that the son couldn't even recognize him. It's this moment that completely changes and defines his life going forward. He has nothing left to lose, and when Kenji calls him in, he goes. Let's take a diversion to talk about how Urasawa sets up his side and particularly minor characters. A lot of them are built upon a certain strong emotional moment in their lives that becomes their defining characteristic. I think this is best seen in Monster. Quite often Tenma will run into a character whose purpose is to push him in a certain direction. Let's take the bird watcher as an example. His moment? He used to love watching birds. The birds used to come and rest on him until one day he shot and killed someone. The birds have never been near him since. His purpose? To dissuade Tenma from shooting Johan. It's a short and effective character conversation that achieves its purpose. But this doesn't always work. Let's take Detective Cho as an example. He's a detective looking into Friend. Actually, he figures it all out within the first 20 or so chapters. His defining moment? He was too busy working and missed all the big events of his family, including the death of his wife. He's also a few weeks from retirement, and just from that last line, you know exactly what is going to happen to him.
You're going to die.
His purpose? To show Friend's reach and maliciousness. Those that get too close will get rejected. This may have been less of a cliche back in '99, and you could say knowing what's going to happen just increases the dread of the scene. For me, it does the opposite, as I sit there knowing exactly what's going to happen to this character after he finishes his exposition. As for the character building style in general, I really like it. It's effective at making a strong point with a personable base. It provides us with a reason to quickly relate and sympathize with a character. This is really a style thing. Urasawa uses this in a lot of his works, so if you're not a fan of it, then this will probably be a sticking point for you in his other series as well. Back to Ocho. He takes the unique spot as being the only one in the team with real combat experience. He's the badass, the loose cannon with nothing to lose. I don't mean that in a disparaging way at all. Ocho is a nice balance for the rest of the gang and their more comfortable workaday lives. He reinforces how important family is, and is probably a big reason why Kenji is so insistent on telling his friends to run away if things get too hot. We haven't really talked about the dynamic between the whole squad yet. For me, this is one of the most engaging aspects of this part of 20th Century Boys. Urasawa has done a great job of endearing us to this cast. We can feel and hopefully relate to these strong bonds between them, seeing both their past selves and their present. Some of the cast are still in need of some development, but Kenji is making up for that as a compelling protagonist. You may already have someone in the gang that you particularly relate to. If not, then there's a good chance you will before the end of the series. Already, Urasawa has got us to empathize with these characters and invest us in their journey. This bleeds through into the tone as well. The main draw of the series is the mystery around Friend, the clues we've been given painting a sinister plan that's underway. Our heroes feel constantly on the back foot, and even in the good times, there's still this fear that something is coming. But at least good times there are. The sinister tone is tempered with moments of actual joy. Kirion's wedding, some of the class reunion, meeting Yukiji again. It's important to have these moments of levity to break the tension. Seeing the characters hanging out and laughing shows what they have to lose. It also stops us from feeling like the story has become too oppressive. These chapters have got the balance down well. For every scene of building up the dread of this nuclear-powered robot, there's this almost slice-of-life interaction between two people, the absurd mixed together with the more down-to-earth. Now forgive me if this gets a bit too bougie, I'm typically a pretty simple Melvin when it comes to themes, but let's circle back to one of those previous comments. While there's this main plot around the discovery of Friend, concurrently runs this really interesting take on growing up. The main cast are young adults getting closer to that 30 milestone and struggling with their place in the world. Kenji is dealing with this fear of growing older. 30 is coming, then 40. When did he give up on his music? Much of these chapters are dealing with Kenji re-embracing his childhood hopefulness after casting aside the adult he became. There's this pessimism towards letting the simple act of growing old drain your passions. Is this an oversimplification? Yes, and I think by design. It's putting childhood up on this pedestal in these opening chapters. By the end of the series, we'll learn that the villain had taken an opposite path. He refused to grow up, still caught in the things of his childhood. The overall message turning into a synthesis of not forgetting your roots, but not being afraid to grow and move on. Welcome to a quick crash course in themes. Let's move to talking about the world. Obviously, this is set in the real world, kind of. We pull on real historical events like the Japan World Expo. There's nothing overtly different to the world that we live in. The major changes are of course what's happening with Friend, the biological weapon attack affecting the world, oof, and, well, of course, the magic. I don't mean Friend floating, that's mostly suggested as smoke and mirrors. I'm talking about the spoon bending, which is just magic. For those who don't know, spoon bending is a classic magician's trick. You make a spoon look like it's bending using some cheeky perspective and sleight of hand. In all accounts, you never actually bend the spoon, merely to give the perception that the spoon bends. In 20th century, boys, this is the state of the spoon bending. This is magic. You can't tell me that man sat down, arduously twisted these spoons, and the other people act this surprised at the end. Clearly, man has learned some actual magic. The implication is that he learned from Friend. Friend also showed a spoon bending talent all those years ago. Likewise, we already get the hint of some psychic ability from Kana, Friend's daughter. From a world-building perspective, this is a bit worrying, particularly if it can be taught. If you can do this to a spoon, what else can you do? If someone stood up today in real life and could do this, it would be sensational, to say the least. In the series, this isn't explained yet, so we probably should reserve judgment until it is. Most likely, Urasawa has a good explanation for how this works and what the limits are, right? On top of this, we have God's clairvoyance. God can see the future. He's also the only person in the series so far who has this gift. Honestly, this is a much more reasonable addition to the world. There's two big reasons why I'd say this can work. One is that he's the only person to have it. It's a unique ability and the character is therefore unique in having it. Two is that it's out of his control. This isn't something he can use. It's something that affects him at its own whims. It's not a skill he can abuse. If he could, Kenji could just ask God to scry on Friend until he figures out his identity. Of course, we can also take the opposite approach. This time, let me refer to Joseph Anderson from his video on Fallout 4.
Whenever a story has to incorporate some sort of prophecy or a psychic fortune teller, then they are admitting defeat and are giving up on their own story making sense. Just think about it. For a prophecy to exist in a story, it means that the writer is now using their own story planning notes and inserting them into the world so they can come true. There's no longer any careful consideration of characters' motivations and how the plot can progress to make the story interesting, and instead the writer shoves their hand up a character's ass to puppet them into rambling on the plan that they already wrote.
I mean, he has a point. Prophecy is a way for the writer to lazily let characters know information that they can't find a way to communicate otherwise. For 20th century boys, God thus far hasn't pushed Kenji into anything he wouldn't know without the prophecy aspect. I.e., you could take the prophecies out and the main plot beats remain the same. Its main role so far has been to push God into helping Kenji to go after Friend and adding to the mounting dread for the reader. So I'm not finding God's abilities a big issue. Moving on from the questionable magic use, the other big part of world building I want to talk about is with the friendship party. Politics is one of those things I don't like talking about, because people get strangely heated whenever it's mentioned. No matter what you say, you'll end up pissing someone off. Even not saying something can be seen as a statement, because when these topics come up, people look so deep for hidden conspiracies. This goes doubly so for those people in government. They are, by design, some of the most scrutinized people on the planet. How did the friendship party rise to power? We know Friend had a decent-sized following prior to the 3-year time skip, and somehow in those 3 years, it was converted into a relatively powerful political party. Before you say it's not really important to the story, Friend's political power is the basis of the rest of the plot. Without the political power, Friend doesn't recreate the Expo or take control of Japan. He would become a celebrity rather than a leader, someone who can be revered but not put into a position of becoming world leader. The friendship party's rise is so important to the story, and it's completely skipped over. Now, time skips can do this, skip over important events that we know the conclusion of, or cut to a more engaging part of the story. We can assume a lot of what happened in the meantime. But like I said, politics is one of the most divisive things on the planet. Modern history is full of political conspiracies. So when we get moments like the bombing of the Diet Building, you cannot say by convenience the whole friendship party wasn't there. I don't know about y'all, but I live in the real world, and that is the most suspicious thing I have ever heard. In a free nation, if the political leaders were the victim of a bombing and only one political party wasn't there, they immediately become suspect number one. There could be stacks of evidence, alibis, whatever, proving their innocence, but for the rest of that faction's days, they will never get over that suspicion. For that faction to peacefully gain full control of a nation with massive approval after all of that is an extreme stretch. To make it worse, there are just some really simple ways to make this more digestible. Friend could have set up some patsy leaders of the party who he sacrificed in the diet attack. Then, using the gap in the party, he'd be forced to take leadership, giving him some sympathy with the public. Okay, yes, 20th Century Boys isn't a political thriller. Maybe this all would have taken the focus away from what's really important. I think I take particular issue with it because I know Urasawa can write these inner political workings and make it interesting. He just did it in his previous series. Monster has this hugely compelling story around Franz Bonaparte, how he attempted to create super soldiers for failing communist regimes. The story barely scratches the surface of it, but even that scratch makes sense. It's explored in much more detail in the sequel. Another Monster explores how Bonaparte became this master of manipulation, using both those skills and the mere fact that he had them to gain political power and essentially grant himself a blank check to do whatever he wanted. Yes, you shouldn't need external content to understand a story, but Monster on its own shows you enough to be reasonable and consistent. Let's pull it back another layer. How did Friend amass such a following in the first place? Again, this is crucially important to the story. Friend himself does very little. He requests things and has such a network of willing people that see his orders out. Where did they all come from, and why are they so devoted? We see early on, Friend has enough support to fill the Budokan, which supports just over 14,000 people. It's never confirmed where these people came from. There are suggestions that Friend has been pulling from local cults, but that doesn't suggest this high a following. I actually do think it's okay to look past this. Communities can form and develop around anything, and we're jumping into Friends when it's already established. However, what I don't think it's okay to look past is the fanaticism of those followers. Having a large following is fine. Again, world building side, this happens in the real world, so no problem translating it into the story. But Friends' followers are weird. They take his word as scripture, they have strange artistic taste, they follow him like lambs to the slaughter. The series intentionally sets them up as peculiar. They're like a manic hive mind. When they fail the mission to get Kana, they immediately turn to burning someone alive. Actually, real quick side note, in the movies, Kenji and Yuki just sit there watching the man burn alive with the store. At least in the manga they'd fled already, but yikes movie. Masuo is probably the best example of the fanatic follower. The boy is doing healing aerobics and listening to Friend CDs. He even becomes an assassin for Friend. How did he get to this point? Skipping ahead a bit, we see the followers during the Bloody New Year's Eve laughing at the carnage. Every single one we meet is unrepentant. They're full crazy and can't be reasoned with. Now there's two main explanations that I've seen. The first comes from the series itself. People were just so caught up in wanting to believe Friend that it became real for them. Those in higher positions genuinely looked up to Friend. We see this with Evil Cop right near the end. Friend told him that he was good enough after a lifetime of feeling second best, so he became ride or die for Friend. I'm not a huge fan of this. I like the concept, but I don't think it fully explains why his followers act like this. Burning your friends alive and laughing when someone points a gun at your head goes too far. Urasawa sets this up as something deeper and more nefarious, and then the rug is pulled out from under us with a, no, these are just normal people radicalized somehow by Friend. That's it. The other explanation is to do with Rainbow Kid, the drug introduced in Ocho's backstory. Ocho goes and shuts down the factory that makes it, which happens to be owned by Friend. The drug itself induces fear-related hallucinations in those that consume it. It's like the T from Batman Begins. It's generally perceived as pretty heavy stuff, tying into Friend's real-world counterpart who experimented with substances that bordered on brainwashing. Much like the diet-building example earlier, I think this is a fair connection, but not a reasonable one. The drugs induce fears in others. Friend uses this to manipulate his followers into believing in him. My first point would be that the state of the only person we definitely see on the drug is this, and the other followers act like this. There's no real similarities there. Secondly, is this a reasonable connection? It's a fair connection, it could work. Friend would need to have been consistently drugging several thousand people for a while, including policemen, with zero repercussions. I just don't think that's overly likely. If that is what the series is going for, then that's a bit too much of a leap for us as an audience to agree to. But if that was not the case, the addition of Rainbow Kid is a strange one. So much of this series follows through later down the line, so much remains relevant. Rainbow Kid's only role is to show Ocho's regret of his history, something which for every single other character is done with regular, non-drug related flashbacks. You might refute this by saying all Friends followers are pretty psychotic. In the new Book of Prophecy, they're grinning while asking for permission to kill those rejected by Friend. By the end of the world, they're convinced aliens are coming and they run around in dumb uniforms. I'd counter that by saying in both of those other two scenarios, there are established reasons completely unrelated to this opening group why those people are so dedicated to Friend. To be honest, the best explanation for this is that it's a play on Friend's original inspiration, taking this real-world group to its extremes, which is a compelling idea, but without an in-world explanation in the story. But maybe I should just deal with expectations. Now, I am saving the big Friend talk for the end, but we've got to have a quick catch-up in these sections. If you're watching this video without having read 20th Century Boys and you ignored my warnings, let me now spoil the ending reveal for you real quick. This is Friend! Well, one of them at least. Well, actually, no, we're saving that for later. I really like Fukube's introduction. He's a character that none of the main cast can remember. At the class reunion, he essentially pushes himself into the narrative by talking to Kenji about Friend. We learn later that this whole story, including his kids, was fabricated to get Fukube onto Kenji's side. For now, Fukube just seems like part of the gang. Well, right up until he supposedly dies. This whole starting section does not give you enough clues to put this together yet, but all these actions still make sense. Friend is literally playing with Kenji, and in a perverse way, forcing himself into a friend group that he never got to be a part of. All through this starting section, we cut from things that were happening in Kenji's childhood to Friend using them in his meetings. Take the I am dead as an example. Most of this serves to confirm the connection, however there are a few other parts that start to look into Friend's character. The most telling is his I am Collins speech. Friend relates himself to Michael Collins, an astronaut on the Apollo 11 trip to the moon. While Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin got to walk on the moon, Collins did not. I am Collins. I was so close to the ground of the moon, and yet I returned without having trod on it. At the end, he's crying. I think this is a genuine moment from Friend, i.e. he's not putting on an act here. He was talking about the secret base just before, so the inference is that Friend is someone who got close to or wanted to join Kenji's group, but never could. This is clearly still something that Friend has never got past, still being emotional about that experience. Friend doesn't get a lot of spots of genuine character moments, but this is definitely the strongest so far. Urasawa has done a great job of making Friend a compelling mystery in these opening chapters. Not only do we want to know who he is, we want him stopped, but we don't want him stopped before we get those answers. By the end of this arc, the target is aimed purely at Sadakio being Friend. There are a few things which these chapters establish which don't come back up later on. Normally I wouldn't care about the smaller details like this, but since 20th Century Boys relies a lot on Kenji's past being important, these stand out. Things like Yamaguchi, one of Kenji's childhood crushes, shows up in a chapter and never heard from again. Or this guy from Kirion's wedding. He even shows up in a flashback but never gets named. Also never heard from again. I think this is one of only 2 characters who show up as part of Kenji's crew in flashbacks but never seen again. Is this nitpicking? Yes, absolutely.
This is nitpicky, but little gaps of continuity like this do contribute to a feeling of inauthenticity. Nitpicks are real and they do matter. You don't want nits, do you? If left unattended, they're gonna hatch into lice. Story lice.
That's Glidus, watch him for some spicy Game of Thrones videos. In a series where so much of Kenji's past is important, these sort of things feel out of place, especially when the final reveal is based around small details like this. I mainly want to bring these up as some forewarning for the rest of the video. There will be some things in this series that I bring up as we go on that will be rather nitpicky, but like Glidus says, these can grow into story lice, and some of them do. Some of the final moments and reveals of the series are damaged simply from the fact that we've been reading closely. And I genuinely think the intention of the series is to read it closely. we're being presented a mystery and trying to find clues to the answers. Sometimes the difference between a nitpick and a subtle clue to the mystery is just whether or not it became relevant at the end. So while there might be things one person disregards while reading, it may be a sticking point for someone else. Now you might be thinking that besides some of those world-building missteps and some nitpicks, this whole section around the first 50 chapters has been mostly positive, and you'd be 100% correct. 20th Century Boys does have a really strong opening. Even in reviews from people who dislike this series, the consensus is that the start is still great. However, it's important to note that in a mystery, the clues and the threads that are opened are only as good as their conclusion. It's not overly difficult to add mystery to a series, but what is hard is paying that all off. In isolation, I think these first 50 chapters are excellent. The dynamic between our main cast is interesting, Kenji's arc is great, the time skip mechanic has worked well as the crew try to remember their past, tying it all together to what's happening in the main narrative. As set up for a longer mystery, there are a lot of clues that have been laid down. There's a lot that the rest of the series gets to and needs to pay off. Finishing this section, there are a number of questions we want to see answered by the rest of the series. How did the Friend Party rise to power? How is Friend controlling his followers? What did Donkey see in the science room that night? Though the biggest three are certainly, who is Friend? Why is Friend doing all of this? And of course, what happened on the bloody New Year's Eve? This saga starts with the changeover to our new hero, Kana. Kenji, at least in the modern day, will be completely absent from this whole section. Before this part even starts in earnest, that's a bold move. Changing a lead character is a tough jump to land. We've just spent 50 odd chapters getting invested in Kenji, only to have to start new on another character. That's a big ask for any series. Now Urasawa has used this again in Pluto and Billy Bat. Let's take Billy as our contrast. We're following Kevin Yamagata as he's tracking down the Momochi Scroll, a way to contact Billy directly. At the end of the Komori Village arc, about halfway through the series, we see Kevin is given a new sense of purpose to go to Spain, and that seems like the journey will end there. Then goons start arriving from the villains and things very quickly turn sinister, and then Kevin, quite abruptly, gets shot. Then it time jumps to our new hero, Kevin Goodman, who's the protagonist of the remaining half of the story. This works in Billy Bat because Kevin Goodman is just an amazing hero. He comes in with charisma and quickly introduces a significant plot that picks up from Kevin Yamagata's arcs. When I think of a series that does the complete opposite and handles this poorly, I think of Arrow. In the first episode of Arrow Season 3, Sarah Lance dies. Now she's absolutely not the main character, but her role as the Black Canary is picked up by Laurel. And it was bad. This was around the time I stopped watching the show. The problem was we'd spent so much of Season 2 building Sarah up as an interesting character. Part of this was done by pushing Laurel down. Sarah was out there helping Oliver, meanwhile Laurel is acting awful and self-destructive for most of the season. So when Laurel takes over from Sarah in the next season, we didn't want her. Here's this character that we made you not like, now she's in the role of the character you do like, please like her now? But no, that's not how this works. This is something that's seen in a lot of superhero media, when the new generation takes over the mantle of the old. Jane Foster becoming Thor, Wally West becoming the Flash, the Joker's daughter, there's a million examples. The main problem in those stories is that the fans are invested in the old character and don't want to start fresh on a new one. I think 20th Century Boys manages to protect itself from that by giving us the character change early. It's only 50 chapters before we've moved on to the new hero. Back to Kana. Does this change work? I would say yes, Kana as the new hero works. We quickly established her personality, she's rocking out, working hard, looking out for people, she's fearless walking into gunfire, and seems like those powers alluded to at the start have only gotten stronger. She has a deep love for her uncle, she hates the police for making him out to be a criminal. She's also quoted as being the top of her class at school, but picks fights over certain history lessons. We already know she's integral to the story, she's the daughter of Friend. Just by that alone, we want to know what happens between her and Friend. Our old main character Kenji becomes a lot of the driving force behind Kana. Her remembering things that Kenji used to say finds a way to keep him relevant in the story. While this character change is jarring, I don't think it's to the series' detriment. Us as readers quickly find ourselves on Kana's side because the starting chapters just set her up so well. We next meet Chono and are introduced to what's going to be the main plot for the first half of this section. Someone, reportedly in a cop uniform, killed someone else with a shotgun. Eventually, Chono and Kana meet, and Chono is sympathetic to her, immediately making us like him more too. He's also the grandson of Cho, the detective who was shockingly killed at the start. As the investigation continues, Kana learns that there was a witness to the shooting. The witness tells us that Mole Cop was the one that shot him, the victim only saying something about the assassination of the Pope before he was shot. Then we cut to this island prison, following a mangaka, Kakuta, who has been sent there. This is essentially going through the same steps as the first 50 chapters. We're widening the diamond, introducing more characters to follow and plot threads that are eventually going to weave themselves together. It's through this character that we learn more about the state of the world. Friend has taken basically dictatorial power over Japan. Kakuta's in here because he violated the youth protection guidelines, when really all he did was write a manga that was too close to what Friend was actually doing. For that, he gets life imprisonment. Friend is clearly running a harsh regime. The wardens in the prison also mention labor camps, which feels very, gulag-y. It's good to know how far Friend's power goes. We even learn a little later that the chief of police is the guy who killed Cho. Friend has obviously put his own people in positions of power, again reinforcing the evil government vibes. It's in this prison we see Ocho again. He was imprisoned shortly after the Bloody New Year's Eve and has been stuck in these isolated cells for the past 14 years. Kakuta ends up in this cell opposite him, and we learn Ocho is close to escaping. We also get this great character building offhand comment. The mangaka has been sent down here for 2 weeks. News around the prison says that's pretty common, but when you come back, you won't live long. Kakuta asks how often Ocho has tried to escape. Ocho replied, every 2 weeks for the past 14 years. Wow, he sure has been down here a long time. No, what he means is, he has tried to save every single person that has come down here, and hasn't been able to until now. It's moments like these that paint so much life into these characters. I also want to praise Urasawa for showing how dark this prison is without actually showing it. From the nail nearly being shoved into this guard's eye to Kakuta being in the off screen, this place feels awful, and Urasawa has only alluded to all of this. We never actually see any violence in the prison until the escape. It's now we break into another new character, Kazumi. She's the type to overreact and freak out and is mostly self-interested. Besides from her plot significance, Kazumi is here to bring some much needed levity to this part of the series. I can imagine her character being quite divisive among readers. I know for a lot of people, including myself once upon a time, find these types of characters incredibly annoying. The series is setting this darker tone as Friend has taken over the world, and there's not really a lot of hope left. Kazumi's character runs opposite to that, and she adds this joyful naivety to the mix. For me, I appreciate her inclusion. While the series can be bleak, there are still moments of joy to be found. Even when Kenji and crew were up against the ropes, there was still time to smile and joke about how Ocho made up the symbol. So far in this section, the series has needed something less serious to balance it all out, and Kazumi fits that role. Also, I need to quickly shout out Kazumi's actress in the live-action movies. She absolutely nails this character, one of my favorite parts of the second movie. Kazumi accidentally finds herself needing to do a report on the Bloody New Year's Eve, which ends up with her meeting God. God then goes on to tell us what really happened that day as we flash back to it. Here are the cliff notes. The gang track down where the remote controlling the robot is. Fukube and Kenji get there. Fukube calls the guy controlling the robot Sarakio and then apologizes to him. He fights with the controller and then they both fall, presumably to their death. Fukube saying, "It's not Sarakio," before they go. The robot's still moving from a pilot on board. Kenji and Maro drive up to the robot, blasting 20th Century Boy as they go. Kenji climbs up to the pilot seat to find it empty. Friend rolls up on the Expo Monument. Meanwhile, the virus is attacking cities all over the globe. Man rocks up saying that they've got a vaccine ready to go, and then it cuts back. The robot exploded way back then, and the whole area became this big remembrance mural. We see who the UN were thanking in that opening shot. It was the Friend Party. Friend for stopping Kenji and delivering a vaccine that saved the world. The Bloody New Year's Eve is such a great moment in this story. This was built to as the climax of the story, but now we're finally going to see what happened. It's full of action and tension, still balanced with these beautiful character moments of just the gang of friends. It builds to this showdown with Fukube and Kenji staring down the man in the mask. Fukube, i.e. Friend, starts building this story around the masked man being Sarakio. Then as he rips off the mask before falling says, "It's not Sarakio." As you're reading, you're essentially getting the same clues that Kenji gets. At this point, it seems like Sarakio is Friend. He wasn't the guy who fell with Fukube because Friend rolls up on Kenji later on. And then we see the heroes lose. We just watch them fight their best and then skip back to the future that actually happened. They're all dead or in hiding. Friend won. So who is the one behind the mask through this section? Your first answer might be Fukube, but I think that's wrong. This is the other friend. He taunts Kenji with the "let's play" lines, and this falls more in line with friend 2's character. Also, we see Fukube has 20th Century Boy the song set up in both his house and the truck. Something we'll learn much later means a lot more to friend than it does Fukube. As for if it was both Fukube and friend through this whole section, well, it's never fully cleared up. It seems most likely this was all friend 2 during this time, and not Fukube though. Researching 20th Century Boys has been really interesting. Chapter 79 is the end of the flashback. Friend takes off his mask to Kenji and we don't see who it is. Then back in the current day, Kana takes out her tape player. Then the rest of the chapter is a flashback of Kenji singing. Actually, most of this chapter is just Kenji singing. It's the first time we hear Bob Lennon as well, arguably one of the most important plot points in the series. Originally, Urasawa said he was going to have this almost mecha-like showdown between the two robots as they crash through the city. But these chapters came out around September 11th, 2001. Urasawa didn't think it right to show that sort of destruction, so changed it to what we have now, Kenji singing. I think the way it is now is brilliant, cutting from all that hype and destruction to Kenji singing his song before everything went down. It's a perfect place to introduce this song that we see Kana listening to again and again, this song that becomes a pretty major plot point in the end. It's just a perfect point to open this thread. It's also a very emotional moment, the last song Kenji got to sing before he presumably died. All in all, just a great moment. Okay, let's talk about the world building again. I gave this series grief at the start because Friend's ascension wasn't supported well and the whole Friend party was just obviously sus to anyone with a brain. Now, the day the disease starts attacking the globe in force, the Friend party just happens to have a vaccine ready to go. This is so sketchy. And then we have Friend himself. He was reported to have rode the Expo monument to go and confront the robot, something that, to the general public, he had no preparation for. Then, the robot, powered by a nuclear reactor, essentially a dirty bomb, explodes in front of him and he's fine in a few weeks, ready to rise to dominate Japan and be beloved by the world. Is there at least some explanation for how this works for the reader? Yes, at the end we get more details around it, but to the general public, that's the story they've been told. Somehow, a completely unprepared Friend just ate this explosion while being in point-blank range, and the world just says, yeah, that makes sense. It's at this point in the story that I have to imagine Urasawa is saying, things are going to happen in the world, and we just need to accept them. Don't think about how Friend did all these miraculous things and why people let him. It's not going to be explained. And for readers like me, this, well, it sucks. This was such a big part of the mystery that I wanted solved. It wasn't just who is Friend, it was how is he doing this, why is he doing this. But now Urasawa has just crossed the how off. It's not important to the story he wants to tell, so he's not going to bother with it. Don't think this is me throwing stones at Urasawa or anything. You're absolutely allowed to do this in a story. Friend's rise to power doesn't contribute anything to the main mystery of his identity, nor does it give us chances for more of those brilliant character moments. In a series that is already over 250 chapters, I would rather this part of the world building be cut than moments with the characters. So no, for the rest of this review, I'm going to leave Friend's rise to power alone. If you're like me and this stuff bothers you, then it's going to continue to bother you. We never get strong explanations. There is some really good stuff here, don't get me wrong. The world within each time skip is compelling, but the core parts of Friend's rise to power, that most fundamental part of the world building, that's not part of the good stuff. Kazumi is researching Friend, and we learn a lot of sketchy things have been going down. After learning the truth from God, she's finding all these other killings that have happened over the years, all that have helped Friend rise to power. One of the big sketchy things going on is Tomodachi Land, or Friend Land if you will. It's almost like a theme park, but full of propaganda. And this is cool, we get to see what the public perception of the Kenji faction is, how the Friend party has spun them into these unrepentant supervillains. We also learn that Tomodachi Land is really just one big brainwashing facility. If they can't nudge you in the right direction, they'll use force. We see one kid get drugged after trying to escape the facility. On the other side of the coin, you have those that respond overly well to the re-education. They get taken into this virtual attraction, which is a recreation of Friend's childhood memories. Now, this would be a good way to explain, and I'm assuming is the reason why, there are all of these Friend people, so grinning and eager to fulfill Friend's wishes. We see one kid who went through it, and he has the same stupid smile as all of these other drones. However, it seems like the virtual attraction can be disastrous as well. If it doesn't brainwash you, it might kill you. We hear about another kid who chewed their wrists off while inside. I love the virtual attraction as an idea in this story. What Urasawa has done is provide a way for the characters to interact with the flashbacks, giving us a new spin on it. This is important because the flashbacks can't really serve as an effective plot push anymore. At the start it was, oh, I remember this thing, let's go investigate that. But now we've time skipped 14 years. That's so much time for the main cast to go through their memories of their childhood and pick out any clues they might have had on Friend. This is what we'd expect the characters to do, especially considering he's actively criminalized them and their friends, and they think he's going to do worse. This goes doubly so if the character has had little to do besides think for the past 14 years. I'm sure some of you know where I'm going with that, and yeah, we're gonna rip it to shreds when we get there. With the virtual attraction, it's no longer just remembering things, it's interacting with the history, talking to past versions of characters, seeing other perspectives on things that have happened. It's taking this original flashback concept and giving it new life, and it's genius. This is actually our first time seeing some of these characters. The only one to really note here is Conchi, who will become important later on, but notice that Fukube is here. This is one of the big moments of his character, so remember this. Actually, I will point this out as well, because Urasawa gets a bonus point through these flashbacks. I've already dropped the bombshell that Fukube is Friend, and a big part of his identity is that he was never noticed, never remembered. In these VA panels, you'll find Fukube pushed half out of frame or covered up by another character. He's also just absent from a lot of the shots too. I love this idea. It's a way for the medium itself, the images, to reinforce the idea of the character, a way to make you pay less attention to Fukube just like all the kids do. Now, this first trip to the Hanging Hill isn't overly important to the plot. We set up a few clues that are going to get paid off later on, those being the two people under the Teru Teru Bozu and what Kenji and Ocho saw upstairs. The attraction itself ends with a young, who we assume to be Friend, showing up on the school roof. Koizumi pulls off his mask to see Sadakio's face and then gets taken out of the attraction. This is a weird moment because the story at this point is trying to build up Sadakio as Friend. However, Kazumi's trip into the VA ends with the idea that the other person under the Teru Teru Bozu is Friend. It's not Sadakio, it's the one who was threatening him, which makes this whole moment on the roof a bit unclear. We don't get the reveal that it was Sadakio's face under the mask for a few more chapters yet. The problem is, on a reread already knowing that, this scene makes no sense. The person in the Hattori mask is supposedly Sada, or at least he has Sada's face. He's referred to as Friend, and he even talks like he is Friend. But we're led to believe that the kid in Sadakio's mask is Sada too, and the Hattori mask kid was the one threatening him under the Teru Teru Bozu. Why is the kid with Sada's face talking like he's Friend? It's honestly just confusing. This whole part on the roof doesn't make any sense. We've essentially just been given confirmation that Friend isn't Sadakio and the real threat is this other pair of legs. Then after we learn it was Sada's face under the Hattori mask, the series will try to play up Sada being Friend for a few chapters when he comes to the school. But this scene has already undercut that by confirming Friend isn't Sada. This whole scene on the roof is an interesting idea that doesn't really hold up. It only serves to confuse rather than to give smart clues. At this point, the story jumps back to Kana in chapter 90. We're 40 chapters deep into this section, and have you noticed that we don't really have a strong plot yet? I honestly struggle to put this into words. I've scripted this bit like 5 times and I still can't get my thoughts across well. My main point is this. We have an overarching drive through the whole series, finding out who Friend is. Then we have arc-centric plots, stopping the bloody New Year's Eve, stopping the assassination, stopping the final virus release. The plot of this arc is saving the Pope, but we don't get the significance of this until right near the end. For the majority of the arc, this simply feels like lowered stakes. We're stopping something not overly important to Friend's overall power, because we don't understand why the Pope is important to Friend's plan. It's a weak basis to the longest arc of the series. As we'll learn about in a moment, this whole plot feels like the cart coming before the horse. Kana is enacting her plan to recruit the local mafias. She heads to a local casino and ends up cleaning house by using her psychic powers. She gives all the money away and asks for everyone to meet her tomorrow at the church so she can use them to defend the Pope. One of the other gamblers talks to her saying, "You've got something magical, better than ESP." Now this could be a broad allusion to her charisma or her fearless, headstrong nature, but with later revelations this doesn't seem true, but we're not going to talk about the magic yet. It's in the middle of this plan that we're finally presented with the new Book of Prophecy. In a flashback to 2002, we see Mon had been researching hard into Friend and came across the new book. It said someone anonymous sent it to him, and I guess that's the truth. There is no character in this series that would leak this information. The part we're concerned about now is in 2014 there will be a gathering at a church in Shinjuku. At that gathering, a savior of humanity will arise in the name of justice, but be assassinated. Let's talk about how this part of the prophecy doesn't really work. What are the prophecies in the new Book of Prophecy? In 2014, there will be a gathering at a church in Shinjuku, and then a nightmarish world will begin once more. At that gathering, a savior of humanity will arise in the name of justice, but be assassinated. Long live the Expo, long live the Expo, progress and harmony for mankind. The Holy Mother will descend. The world elects a world president, 60 million for and not one vote against. The salesmen will drop their briefcases, the phone will ring, and all the preparations are complete. And the world will fall into ruin. These last ones we won't actually learn about for a while yet. We never get shown all of the prophecies at one time. The prophecies are all based on what the kids were thinking about at the time, based on things they knew or thought were cool. We see the original Book of Prophecy had places chosen simply because they were the names of cafes that Kenji knew. The new Book of Prophecy has the Japan Expo because it's a defining moment to Fukube. The world president is in a way the ultimate goal of Fukube's time as Friend. But why the church in Shinjuku part? This part never gets an explanation. It's never a part of the kid's childhood, so why include it as a place? Every other mentioned place has an explanation, but not the church assassination. This is why it feels a bit like the cart before the horse. The other prophecies have historical reasons and are being recreated in the modern day. The assassination is the opposite. It has no historical reason, but is something that is happening in the modern day. It feels more like Urasawa putting this into the new Book of Prophecies to tie it in better rather than what the Fukube crew would have actually written back in the day. Nonetheless, still a cool moment, and the book itself finally brings that sinister edge back into the story. The plans go deeper than the bloody New Year's Eve, and they're about to get underway. We see Kana address the crowd and Mole Cop coming in to point the gun at her. Then Ocho smashes in through the stained glass window and body blocks like an absolute champ. Yeah, go on, we'll slap this into the iconic scenes list. Then the gunshot, and it's Mole Cop that falls down. He's the savior of humanity. Another prophecy that Friend has twisted to make the hero on his side. Turns out it was Masuo who shot him. He helicopters away with the ever so ominous next prophecy. The Holy Mother will descend, promising Kiriko's return. All along the way so far, we've also been getting some really nice character moments. Urasawa's characters are still the greatest strength in this story. Simple moments of two people talking to each other help put a lot of emotional weight behind the things that are happening. We weren't worried about Kana being shot just because we like her character. We know what she means to everyone else as well. She's seen as the last hope by the old gang. Their love for Kenji now resting on Kana, then through their interactions that second-hand love turning into first-hand. Ocho at this point may well see Kana as a surrogate for the son that he no longer has. We know Yuki feels this way. The Shinjuku church scene ends with Yuki and Kana eating together. It's this peaceful moment after the chaos where Yuki just lays it bare, becoming my next favorite moment in the series. You are my daughter, a precious daughter that Kenji left me with. On the bloody New Year's Eve of 2000, he told us, please, just don't die. Now let's eat before the noodles get cold. This is why so much of the series works. I know I've bagged on the world building and the contrivances in the plot, and there will be more to come, but 20th Century Boys always comes back to this. Strong emotional moments between characters we care about and can relate to. I don't want to undersell how amazing these moments are. Jumping back in, it's time to finally meet Sadakio. At this point, we've been led to believe Sadakio is Friend, so this is a big deal. Sada comes in as Kazumi's new English teacher, and she passes out because it was his face she saw under the Friend mask in the VA. Shortly after, she meets Kana and fills her in on everything she's learned, both from Yosh and in Tomodachi Land. After school ends, Sada half kidnaps, half invites Kazumi back to his house. We already knew Sada was a bit strange. He's the kid who used to chant to aliens on the roof. Now we're learning the extent of that. He starts freaking out over classifications of Gundam or the fact that his car is getting wet. He yells out at a mother that's not there in his home. Sada even comes in with the mask on, asking if Kazumi thinks he is friend. The whole situation changes when the school principal rings the house and Kazumi starts screaming to be saved. Sada finally decides to turn against friend. He goes into the other room where this computer is talking to him real brainwashy-like. We actually learn later on the friend party were drugging Sada as well, just to add more fuel to the sympathy we're starting to gain for this character. Sada calls the computer mother and smashes it to pieces, telling Kazumi he'll fight to get her out safe. Now this feels like a big character turn, and it is, so Urasawa immediately jumps back into Sada's backstory to get this to make sense. Sada was bullied pretty consistently. If he wasn't bullied, he was forgotten, not noticed by anyone, friends or teachers. Even when they went on a school field trip, there were no photos of Sadakio. This is supposed to be why his child model had his adult face on it in the attraction. Out of all of those photos, Sada didn't appear once, completely forgotten. When he came back to his old town to visit, no one recognized him. There was this rumor that he died after moving away. He tells us that he used to send mail to his old teacher, who was so supportive when Sada finally made a friend. Sada went on to become a teacher himself and swore that he would never forget a single student that he'd ever had. Kazumi says maybe that teacher will still remember him, so they flee to the teacher's rest home. When it seems like the teacher doesn't remember him after all, the teacher heads over to his drawers and pulls out a single photo. A photo of Sadakio from their field trip all those years ago. Sadakio was never forgotten. This is another one of my favorite moments in the series. I swear Naoki Urasawa can just take a few chapters and tell a more compelling character story than some other mangakas can do over the course of their whole series. Again, Urasawa is showing his absolute mastery of character writing, as this simple moment of giving someone a photograph of themselves as a child is so emotional. We just went from Sadakio as top friend suspect to this deeply troubled human being, manipulated and tortured by the friend party, whose only goal is to ensure that no student of his ever had to endure the pain of feeling invisible. But Urasawa is not done building up Sada's character. While all this is happening, Kana is being driven by her school principal to head towards Sada and Kazumi. The principal reveals that she's big team friend and thinks that she can curry favor from Kana, going on to blurt out the most important thing that she could, that friend is Kana's father. Kana blows up the car's bonnet, then chokes the lady with her mind. She also very might have just killed this lady with her psychic powers. The last shot we see is of the principal's glasses breaking from tension with a snap sound effect. Whoa, okay, this is a reaction. Kana just learned that her actual father is the one who killed her surrogate father, Kenji. Understandably, she's a bit pissed. Draw what conclusions you will, at this stage in the story, I don't think she does kill the principal. The principal doesn't show up again for the rest of the series, so this is another classic Urasawa leave it up to your interpretation. Kana has presumably not killed anyone yet, and her reaction afterwards feels more in line with finding out the truth of her parentage, and not that coupled with killing someone in a rage. She also bounces back a bit too quickly for if she just killed someone. In the end, it's Kenji's lessons that bring her back, listening to Bob Lennon in her head and feeling invincible once again. While she makes her way to Sada and Kazumi, Takazu is one step behind her. This is the crazy lady running Tomodachi Land. Also, I'm not sure if it's supposed to be Takasugi or Takasu, but we're going to be sticking to the latter. Anyways, she's surrounding the old folks' home and is prepared to kill everyone inside to make sure that Sada doesn't escape. Sadakio then gives us the final piece of his backstory. Mon came to see him back in 2003 while he was still investigating. Sada admits that he killed Mon to protect Friend's identity, but then gives Kazumi the memo of all the things Mon had learned. Yosh then helicopters in to save the day, but Sada runs back inside to buy them some time. He ends up being allowed to leave by holding a few of Friend's historical items hostage. This is some really key insight into Friend's character. The implication is if Takasu let Sada burn them, she'd be rejected as well. Friend still holds these pieces of his childhood as the most important things in the world. In fact, Sada was living in a replica of Friend's childhood home, which was why it was a big deal when he burned it down to escape. In this case, it doesn't seem to get Sada very far, as the next day the news shows his car burned out with a body inside, a seemingly pointed rejection for what he did to Friend's home. It's now that Kana begins the search for her mother. We haven't actually talked much about Kiriko yet. She gets development in the first 50 chapters. She's someone who has given up so much to protect her family. The only selfish thing she seemed to have done is leave Kana with Kenji, which is why Kenji was so willing to take care of her. She's also seemingly allied herself with Friend, not just from the letter, but the fact that she had his baby as well. So Kana follows her trail to a lab where the original virus was made. This lab also has the nice touch of showing Yamane's name, despite us not actually knowing who that is yet. It's here that she figures out that her mother was part of the team that made the virus, the whole lab being a Friend installation before it officially became the Friend Party. It's here where we get another iconic moment. Kana pulls out the note written by her mother. "I am Godzilla. I crushed 150,000 people under my feet." That's just such a strong and memorable metaphor. It's so good. It's also in this town that Kana comes across the videos of her mother. Kiriko talks about her plan to meet Yamane in 2002 to stop Friend, saying that if she fails, modern history will end in 2015. The final message she has is for Kana. "Kana, whatever you do, please be happy." These are the moments that define 20th Century Boys for me. Kana has just learned that her father is Friend, that her mother was behind the virus that heralded the bloody New Year's Eve. Now she gets this little time capsule from her mother 12 years ago. She did the right thing, turned against Friend and tried to stop him, finally showing that she does care for her daughter. Kiriko got to leave one message for one person, and it's for Kana, a daughter that she loves but can never meet. The news starts reporting that another bloodletting virus has started attacking places around the world, linking Kana's newfound knowledge from the Mother Hunt back into the main plot. Kana also has her first prophecy about the robot returning in 2015 spelling trouble. Now we have our deadline again. The first part was a build towards a New Year's Eve in 2000, now it's building towards the start of 2015. This also ties back into the first chapter. If you remember right at the start, we had that shot of Kana waking up to see the robot outside her window. Now we have an idea that Friend might just pull off another bloody New Year's Eve. The building continues with finally meeting Haru and seeing Maruo again. We've seen Haru on TV a handful of times already. He's probably the second most famous person in Japan right now, behind Friend of course. He wrote the Expo theme song and seems to have the support of Friend, so obviously he must be Team Friend, which makes it strange that Maruo is working as Haru's manager. Well, quickly we learn that Haru is not Team Friend at all. Maruo and Haru go to visit Friend one day, and Maruo has smuggled a chest full of dynamite in with him, intending to blow Friend up even at the cost of his own life. Haru notices this and says, "If you find an opportunity, do it." This is brutal. Maruo is willing to blow himself up to take down Friend. He ends up not going through with it after seeing one of Friend's inner circle celebrating the birth of his son. Maruo won't let himself fall to their level, remembering what Kenji stood for. How quickly this scene sets up where Maruo is at, what his mental state is like, and how much of his life is still tied to Kenji and the bloody New Year's Eve. Again, Urasawa just keeps flexing his character work. We then jump back to Ocho and... oh, it's time for this scene. Whew, okay. So Ocho has been investigating Dr. Yamane. As he's investigating, he suddenly remembers something important. Yamane had talked to him back in school about the new book of prophecy. He had hidden a secret message in a book at the library that no one would ever take out. Okay, this is one of those moments that I need to talk 100% from my own biases on, because I cannot explain how much this scene in particular frustrates me. I can understand Ocho not remembering this vital clue before the bloody New Year's Eve. He wasn't back in Japan too long before it all went down. But you're telling me, in the 14 years that Ocho spent in solitary confinement, where there is literally nothing to do besides think between escape attempts, not once in 14 years did Ocho think about Yamane. Yamane who talked to him about the new book of prophecy. Yamane who was the biggest science buff in his year level. Yamane who had a crush on Kiriko. Yamane, who had the original idea of the global virus. But no, it's now in the search for Yamane that it all comes back to him, and he gets the clue that he needs. That Yamane was going to show up in the science room that night. Show up in the science room with friend invited that night. Ocho goes from trying to figure out where Yamane might have gone to remembering something vital that helped Ocho find him on the only possible day it could. I'm sorry, but this is contrived. Contrived, adjective, created or arranged in a way that seems artificial and unrealistic. Flashbacks pushing the narrative forward and giving the cast new clues as they start to remember things is a really great idea. At the start. For those first 50 chapters, this makes sense as they start to reconnect with their childhood friends and the memories that come with them. Then the virtual attraction is introduced in these chapters as a way to get new perspectives, to talk with characters that are no longer with us. It's a clever way to keep this flashback mechanic without it becoming too convenient. The first thing any normal person would do if they found out someone evil was reenacting plans from their childhood would be to sit down with those classmates and try to remember every single thing you could. So when we see characters suddenly remember something this important after a 14-year time skip, it makes us feel like we shouldn't take this mystery seriously, that the answers aren't going to be carefully built on old clues, the characters will just remember something new that gives them exactly what they need. You could defend this whole thing as, hey, sometimes these memories slip by the wayside, especially when, at the time, you never really paid that much attention to them. And honestly, considering how this series ends, I'd let you have that. But in this instance, coupled with how suspicious Ocho should have found Yamane already, and it just happening to be on the day of the science room meeting, it's just dumb. It's all way too convenient. Okay, rant done, let's keep going. So Ocho, by the grace of the author, makes his way to the science room, where he meets Yamane. Yamane says that Friend was born in this science room, which immediately makes us remember that Donkey saw something in here all those years ago. Then Friend arrives. We haven't had Friend show up in person for a long time. The last time someone got this close to Friend was when Kenji tried to assassinate him at the start. Friend starts talking strangely, going back to those lines from the start as well. I am Collins. Look. Someone look at me. Someone be shocked. Someone scream, run around in terror. Yamane counters by talking about the lies of 1970 and 71, calling Friend a fraud, a trickster. We have actually heard a bit about these lies of 1970 and 71 already. They seem to be central to figuring out who Friend is. Well, immediately, Friend starts threatening. Soon, squads of Friend's men will be pouring into this room. Simultaneously running to the meeting in the science room are 4 other stories of the gang figuring out who Friend is. We first see Haru sketching down what Friend looks like from their meeting. Maruo, shocked, goes to this apartment. He talks to the child and mother, and apparently there are 2 other kids in this family. They still sometimes make that Ken-chan rice. The mother says that the Friend party gave her a lot of money to let them do that. And if you've been paying attention, you know who Friend is. Yosh and Yuki talk about Fukube, who used to photograph them all during their time before the bloody New Year's Eve. Yosh saying that he couldn't remember who Fukube was until Kenji started talking about him. Then Yosh calls up their old teacher to learn who owned up to the spoon bending at the reunion. We then cut back to Kenji seeing Friend take off his mask in the bloody New Year's Eve, and Kana is remembering things from her infancy when Friend picked her up. It leads her to the school where Friend currently is, and just as she's remembering, she hears it. Yamane shoots Friend dead. At this point, the story has given you all the clues to figure out who Friend is. Ocho moves over and takes off the mask. And yes, it's Fukube. Now this is a nice space to stop before we get to the latter part of this arc. If you're thinking the death of Friend is a real anticlimax, yes, you're 100% correct, that's the point. It was too easy. It feels like something is wrong, and it is. There's this beautiful uneasiness that comes into these last chapters, and it pays off beautifully. Friend has a plan that uses his own death to his advantage, but no one knows what it is. Even Man and the Friend party have no idea to add to the surprise. The reveal of Fukube as Friend is such a great moment. It's an immediate recontextualization of everything we've just read. Fukube never appeared in the character's flashbacks, though he did appear in the virtual attraction, which might have given you the impression that he was there the whole time. Yosh himself even wonders why did they let Fukube into the team when no one could remember him. Then Yosh remembers Fukube's real name was Hattori. We knew Fukube was a nickname from when he was first introduced at the class reunion, but no one cared to call him by his real name, and presumably no one even remembered what it was. For context, Ocho is a nickname too, though he gets called by his real name, Ochai, more than once through this series. Once the gang remember that Fukube's real name was Hattori, the mask becomes so much more obvious. It's a Ninja Hattori mask from the anime manga of the same name. The name reveal, I think, is a mixed bag. It's a cool reveal of Friend's identity staring you in the face for the entire series, but the reader was never given this clue. Not once in the series is Fukube called Hattori to let us figure this out. For the characters, I want to say it's another one of those things that make you think, really? In 14 years you didn't name the Friend mask as the Hattori mask and remember this key piece of information? Though if I said that, I'd be wrong. As a political figure, Friend goes with the mask with the symbol on it. Only a handful of times does he go with the Hattori mask. The only time anyone besides Kenji would have seen this mask is if they could see Friend at the top of the Expo monument during the bloody New Year's Eve. I'd think this unlikely since the only people close all survived a big explosion, so they were probably running for their lives, so it's most likely that the gang never actually saw this mask. It's this weird situation of the gang have half of the clue and us as the reader have the other half. Only now are they being put together. However, if you're a reader with some knowledge of Japanese kanji, I've been told that Fukube and Hattori are spelled with the same kanji, albeit a more non-standard use, meaning that you might have pieced this together a while back. We get a few chapters around the fallout of Friend's death. The world is mourning. Our heroes are celebrating. The mangaka who escaped prison with Ocho reunites with his friends, the Friend party starts to implode, their only concrete plans at this point are to follow Friend's will, to stage a small funeral for him, and then, when public opinion forces them to do something bigger, stage the biggest funeral ever supported by thousands of volunteers. There's still this risk of the virus out there though, and the assassination of the Pope. The heroes are left wondering if the Friend party are going to follow through on those prophecies. Also, Yamane had got shot after he killed Friend. We see on the news that the virus is still attacking more towns, but no big cities have been hit yet. Ocho tells Kana what Yamane had told him about her mother. Kiriko knew the last part of the new book of prophecy. The world president will be elected. 60 million votes for and not one vote against. Yamane had developed another virus, far more deadly than the original, and we learned the most key piece of information. For any virus, there will always be 1% of the population who naturally have immunity. If 60 million people elect the world president, where did the other 99% of the population go? So Ocho runs off to keep working against Friend. We then get to see two of these towns that are getting hit with the virus. This is a chance for Urasawa to flex on us with his character writing again, but it's also raising the personal stakes of what's about to happen. People are dying, people just like these ones. This young boy who is painstakingly burying every single person in his town, being the only survivor of the virus. This old couple whose town has been isolated from the rest of Germany, wondering which of them should take the only single shot of vaccine that they have. It's through these stories that we see where Kiriko is. She's been running around America trying to mass produce a vaccine and giving out the little amount that she has to anyone who will take it. We also get to see Kirion again, who's been trying to make his soba big in the States. Kirion didn't come to help Kenji on the bloody New Year's Eve. He feels like he can't return to Japan without first justifying leaving in the first place by becoming a success. Then he runs into Kiriko's trail and decides to go and help her. Both of these won't really reach their full importance until the next section. Back with the gang, they're in desperate need for some fresh clues, so they decide to break back into the virtual attraction. This time, the attraction has changed to the real 1971. Last time, when it was just Kazumi, it was supposedly 1971, but the Hanging Hill incident happened in 1970. The series has been building up the importance of these lies, the lies of 1970 and 71. So this time, we get to actually see what one of these lies were. At the same time, in the real world, Takasu, Yuki, Ocho, and Manjome all think they see Friend walking around, suggesting that he's actually still alive. However, these are all short glimpses, so we're not too sure. It's still building on this tension of Friend's death being well too easy. Inside the attraction, we see what really happened in the science room when Donkey jumped out the window. Fukube had seemingly hung himself, with Yamane and this isn't actually Sarakio watching on. Tell everyone you know about this miracle. When Donkey doesn't believe it, Fukube gets the other two to reject him. Then Friend shows up, modern day Friend, masked and all. He starts hanging child Fukube for real before he's pulled out of the simulation. We're going to dig deeper into that moment in the Friend section, but for the keen-eyed reader, this is actually setting up a coming plot point. Urasawa isn't beating you over the head with it, but the clues are here, staring at you. Then we get these really nice character moments of Yosh and Kana finding their way out of the virtual attraction. Kana has a pep talk with Donkey that reignites her passion to stop Friend. Yosh gets another of my favorite moments in this series. He's been wondering what he was doing in the summer of 71. All his friends were busy with school or work. Their base was destroyed to build the bowling alley. No one knew where Yosh was. Then he finds his younger self building another secret base all on his own. This is another spot where I have to talk 100% out of my own biases. This breaks my heart. Seeing older Yoshitsune supporting his childhood self build a base that none of his friends actually care about anymore, spending his whole summer doing this, is so sweet. Every single time I have read this story, this scene has never failed to actually oof me. But let's keep going. So Friend's funeral has become this massive event. Just like Friend's will said, the world wouldn't sit idly by with a small funeral. Man learns that the Pope will come before Friend's body. This is when he figures out what Friend is going to do, and his faith is restored. We also get a strong clue when this kid seemingly gets grabbed by Friend while mourning. Though with the context of Friend being surrounded by loud flowers while people mourn in front of him, I can only imagine this was a psychic thing and not a literal grab. The rest of the gang are still working under the assumption that Friend had got Masuo prepped to kill the Pope. There's all this tension on the Pope's visit to Shinjuku, the setup from the earlier chapters finally paying off. Some of Friend's people are around with guns, but they all pop cyanide tablets before they can be questioned. All in all, the Pope gets out okay. Then he goes to Friend's funeral. Kana and Yuki go as well. Ocho and a few others have set up stations around the place to look for Masuo. The tension starts getting really high and it keeps building, and then we see Masuo peek out from the expo monument, but everyone's attention is elsewhere as Friend stands up. Then Masuo takes the shot and Friend body blocks for the Pope. As the world holds its breath thinking Friend has just died again, Friend struggles to center stage and raises his hand in the air. I love this moment. This is another iconic moment of 20th Century Boys. The clues for this are pretty clear on what's going to happen, though if you're reading quickly, you might be in the same state as the main cast. You might still think this is about the assassination of the Pope, and then this comes as such a shock. Friend, just blessed by the highest rank person of a faith based around someone who resurrected, seemingly resurrects himself to protect that person. Seeing the people cheer as Friend raises his hand is actually haunting. Seeing the world so willingly accept the show that's being presented to them. I think if you asked anyone who's read the whole series, what is the defining moment, they would say Friend's resurrection. That page of Friend standing in everyone's surprise after the bullet raising a bloody hand to the heavens, he became a god. I only wish it lasted longer in the manga. Now, it's a bit goofier in the movies because Friend doesn't actually get shot, but he still does the pose as if he was shot. But listen to the sound in this scene and just feel that dread sink in. Genuinely gives me shivers. The movies don't do everything right, but they absolutely land the impact of this scene. Hearing the people shout, seeing them raise their hands in seeming submission, glorious. The final chapters of this section are the newly revived and deified Friend learning where his plans are up to. Then the phone rings. The salesmen have reached their final destination. The briefcases are dropped, and the world fell into ruin. We open on Kenji, alive and well, picking up 3 years after Friend's resurrection. This is the final major time skip of the series. With Kenji teased, we actually just cut straight into Fukube's backstory. We'll get more into this in the Friends section, but here are the cliff notes. This backstory shows everything from Fukube's perspective. The lies of 1970 and 71, Fukube and Kenji's relationship. Most telling are the insights into Fukube's psyche. It seems like he's more concerned with perception and being important than anything else. I should also point out that this is the first time we see Egghead as well. That will be important later on. We see in story that whole backstory was like a recreation of Fukube's memories being experienced by Friend, with this ominous shot of Kenji at the end. This friend does actually have prophecy powers, so this is honestly a bit vague as if it was all a vision or if it was part of the program. What we do know is that Friend has become the world president. Much like the opening at the very start, these are just the main clues before we jump into the actual plot of the arc. We meet two young kids, Katsuo and Sane. They're set up like Kenji and Kiriko, with the impetuous younger brother and the more practical older sister. This is a cheeky way for Urasawa to get us on their side quickly, since we're already invested in Kenji and Kiriko. They're taking care of a wounded Ocho hiding out in their shed. It's through these two characters that we get caught up on what's happening in the world right now. Friend has taken complete control. He's introduced his own currency and remade the calendar to start from his resurrection. This is reinforcing the Jesus parallel, mimicking the idea of the Western calendar beginning with the birth of Christ. There's a new military developed called the Earth Defense Force, whose job it is to protect the world from aliens. Kenji himself has now been rebranded as being an alien all along. It seems like that has become the popular opinion of everyone who's left. The virus did manage to cut out large swaths of the population, but we get some details later that it probably wasn't to the extent of just 1% survival. Those left seem quietly content with what Friend is doing. Now, I did promise I would stop talking about the world building, but I actually quite like this. Most of the world's population has died. Friend has actively killed off all of those who expressed dissent, like Sane's old crush. The world has had 3 years to settle into this new regime and to fall into complacency. At this point, people as old as 17 have been receiving Friend's propaganda since birth. It makes so much more sense now, more than any other part in the series, that the world is so pro-Friend. Sane also talks about the Genji faction and the Ice Queen, two gangs still working against Friend, run by Yoshitsune and Kana respectively. Kana has even been planning an uprising on August 20th that the kids learn about after leaving their TV on for too long. Remember this point. The kids end up almost getting shot for listening to Kana's broadcast. Then they flee with Ocho and meet God. Then God gives us the threat for the spinal arc. When a kid gets all the toys he wants without difficulty until finally there's nothing left for him to want, what does he do next? Friend is about to close his toy box. The kids get sent out on a mission by Ocho, but that quickly changes when they see one of the people in the Genji faction get shot by the Earth Defense Force. Before he dies, the man says that Friend must have spies in both gangs, so Sane runs to tell the Ice Queen. She runs and does just that, meeting the Ice Queen herself, Kana. I love this introduction of Kana. The girl is broken at this point in the story. When she's first introduced, she's high energy, dancing in her room, smiling and feeding people at her job, running into gunfire to tell mobsters to knock it off. Now she's slower, she moves less, and possibly the part you'll notice first, she doesn't smile anymore. We see a big fake smile when she's encouraging her team, but besides that, she doesn't smile once until 21st Century Boys. If that wasn't enough, she gives Sane all the tapes she has of Kenji's songs, saying that she won't need them anymore. This is someone who has totally lost hope of surviving. She's about to throw herself and everyone following her at Friend and fully expects them to die. The idea of Sane coming here was to let Kana know that there is a spy in their ranks and Friend knows about the August 20th uprising. Plot-wise, it's a bit null. I mean, Kana, buddy, you're publicly broadcasting your plans on TV. Of course Friend knows that you're coming. The point, I guess, is to show Kana's cold kindness to the spy, giving him some money and sending him on his way, but acknowledging that Friend won't let him live long now anyway. Kana doesn't even try to protect him and just leaves him with a sigh, knowing that it's another person that's going to die for her. Sane hears Bob Lennon and realizes that she knows more than what was on the tapes. There was more of that song when it came on the radio. When she tells Ocho, this is when he realizes Kenji must still be alive. He tries to tell Kana about it, but she refuses to get her hopes up again. I can't cry anymore. This is sad for us as readers because the series gave us 120 chapters endearing us to Kana, only to see her in such a rough place. We get her story of how she got the vaccine. She got called in by the mobsters and they showed her this mountain of vaccine. They told her they had to all survive to do any good in the world and that they should all take it. Kana reluctantly agrees and takes the vaccine. Shortly after, she learns that what they all took was a placebo and they marched on Friend without her. Now, they're wiped out, either by Friend or the virus. All but her. This is when we get to my next favorite moment. Ocho refuses to let Kana kamikaze herself at Friend, losing yet another child. He starts running to the roof with a radio trying to find Kenji's song to play for her, to show he's still alive and there is hope. Kana follows, yelling at him. Ocho is pleading for Kenji to come through for her, and just as it seems like it won't happen, the radio quietly begins playing. Then Kana kneels down and hugs the radio. It's so good. Hope. Kana cancels the uprising and takes a walk with Ocho, and while your emotions are still high off that last moment, the gut punch hits you. Friend raids the base and captures, i.e. kills, all her comrades, with a helicopter telling her to surrender to save their lives. Build them up and knock them down. A bit earlier, we caught up with Chono. He's become a wall guard in one of these walled communities. It seems like this is what Japan has become, a series of walled cities or communities, each run by some friend sycophant. By this point, Kenji has made it to Chono's town, walking right through the gate. The guards start mobilizing, thinking that he's an alien. This prompts Kenji to come out and play for them. And here we go, another iconic moment. One of the guards shoots him. Kenji gets back up, walks right up to him, and brings him to his knees. You don't shoot someone when they're singing. Iconic. This crowd of people who have been following Kenji break down the town wall. They're following him like a band on tour. If you haven't picked up the Woodstock imagery, you will soon. The crowd manages to dissolve the situation, Kenji and Chono beginning their trip to the next town. They're starting a journey that will eventually lead them to Friend. Back with Kana, her and Ocho surrender to the new Friend faction. These guys are run by Man, who asks if Kana can assassinate Friend for him. Looks like he's not too keen on this new friend and wants him put down for good. He says this friend murmured, "If I were Fukube, what would I do?" Pretty much confirming that it is someone else. It's during this conversation that we learn about Fukube's history as Child A. Man tried to put him into essentially a kid's talent show with his spoon bending, but Fukube did something that caused the show to get cancelled. It suggested that he couldn't do the spoon bending during the practice, so the studio had to pull the plug. But it's not overly clear. It's after this that Fukube says one day he'll implement the example project. He'll kill everyone who calls him a liar or a fraud or teased him. He'll take over the world and kill the people. This is another point we'll circle back to in the friend discussion. Actually, something I should point out here, both in this scene and when Ocho figures out Kenji's alive, there's also been concurrent scenes with Haru and Maruo, who come to the same reveals, just by different means. This is a trick Urasawa uses pretty consistently through this series, having more than one group of characters learning about something at the same time. Take the friend reveal as an example. We had about 4 different stories of people figuring out Fukube was Friend before Yamane shoots him. It's a great way of providing more details to those reveals. In this case, Haru and Maruo are filling in the blanks of what it would be strange for Manjome to talk about. Us as the reader gets the whole story, and it feels very natural. Back with Kenji, he's making his way towards Friend. He does some fishing, heads through this town, makes it through the gate, then goes and has a showdown with the assassin guy. It's during this showdown that Kenji fills us in on what happened to him between the bloody New Year's Eve and now. Why has he taken this long to show up again? Well, Urasawa goes for one of the most despised tropes as his explanation.
I have amnesia!
Now, I am more forgiving to this because it isn't just, oh, he had amnesia as a convenient way to keep him out of the plot. It actually becomes a character choice. A while after the bloody New Year's Eve, he'd found his way back to Tokyo, only to find his memories returning to him. So he ran. His amnesia became a choice from then on, rather than just a cheap way for the writer to get what they want. If you've been reading closely, you'll understand why this is a big deal. One of the early defining Kana quotes is when she talks about Kenji. My uncle said running away isn't an embarrassing thing to do, but he never ever ran away. Now we're learning the truth. He absolutely ran away. Kana has, at least in part, built up an incorrect image of what Kenji stood for. This is so important for a later moment that might otherwise really make you dislike Kenji. When the World Fair opened in 2015 with Friend's Resurrection, Kenji got his memories back. This is still an amnesia plotline, and if you don't like this on principle, I totally understand. It's a really tired trope at this point. Kenji manages to talk the assassin guy down, and now it's full steam ahead back into Tokyo. Back with Maruo, he heads off to find Kiriko. She's holed up in a compound run by Kirion, and this is where we finally get Kirion's backstory. He was one of the old gang that didn't come to help Kenji on the bloody New Year's Eve. Turns out it was because he was too busy cheating on his wife. He also gives us the next clue about Friend's plot. Friends made flying saucers that will spread the final virus over all of the major cities. The world is done for. The big hope comes from Kiriko, who is here. She's made a new vaccine for the final virus and is testing it on herself. If she lives, humanity wins. While she waits to see if it works, she fills us in on more of her backstory, particularly with Fukube. Her learning that he was this secret cult leader and the revelations of how deep it went on the bloody New Year's Eve. Though this does bring up the question, how did she keep Fukube's secret from her family? We see how important family is to her, particularly Kenji. When we see Friend start to seduce Kiriko, it's right after she turns down her ex-boyfriend's proposal. Why did she turn that guy down? She needed to look after her family. They're her top priority. Kiriko's character has been shown to us as the type to absolutely call her family and say, "Hey, I'm Preggers and this is the dad." I think this is another spot of the series fudging the world to get the result Urasawa wants. Again, if these things don't bother you, then sweet as, but I can equally understand that these things might build up on you to make this main plot feel too convenient. Kiriko always felt way too close to her family for them to not know who the parent of her child is. Let's break to talk about some praise though. We haven't really talked about the art much. Let's take a moment to appreciate that Urasawa has taken a cast of characters through 4 different time skips, and you can still recognize all of them. From childhood to 1997 to 2000, 2015, 2017, and now 18, you can still see clearly which character is which and their features coming through. It's also not a matter of moving on and then only drawing the characters one way from then on. We're cutting backwards and forwards, balancing multiple character designs. We see Kiriko as a child, we flash back to her in 2000, modern day. I can't imagine this is easy, particularly when you're trying to make a more realistic approach. It's great stuff. A little earlier, Kana and Ocho finally got to reunite with Yosh and Yuki. They spill the beans that they're going to go and assassinate Friend, and it's decided Yuki will join them. The squad heads out, locked and loaded, with Manjome's boys letting them through all the checkpoints. Then Kana dobs in the others for carrying weapons. They get taken away by Takasu, and Kana heads up to Friend alone, carrying nothing but a grenade. This hurts to see. We just saw Kana go through this moment of choosing not to throw her gang's life away, and now she's going to blow herself up with Friend if need be. This does make sense though. Kana's callousness mainly comes from seeing so many people die over the past 3 years, particularly with people dying specifically for her. Friend, by killing off her gang, has essentially sent her back to her original plan, to die alongside her squad. So she sits down and has a conversation with Friend. There's been this idea thrown around that Friend would never hurt Kana. She's still his daughter after all. But if this Friend isn't Fukube, then Kana won't be so safe. Wouldn't you know it, by the end of the conversation, Friend orders Kana rejected, confirming once again that this is someone else. Kana pulls her grenade to take him hostage, and we get a few choice cuts of dialogue here from Friend. He says, "Only the Expo will remain once all civilizations fall." And when asked about his name, "Kenji knows who I am." And of course, he says the thing, "I'm a 20th century boy." Then Kana manages to make it out alive. Meanwhile, Takasu has killed Manjome and tries to frame Ocho and Yuki for it, but they get away. They end up where the flying saucers are being held, and they meet Mabo. Mabo and Yanbo were originally Team Friend, choosing to dob Kenji in rather than come to his aid. Now they've gone against Friend and got Professor Shikishima to make another robot. They show it off to Yuki and Ocho. Their plan is to do like a reverse bloody New Year's Eve. When the flying saucers come, have the giant robot shoot them down out of the sky to save the day. Speaking of which, the saucers have begun to fly around Japan, dropping paint as a test run to see their effectiveness. After the whole Friend assassination mission, we get another Yukiji Kana scene. In the church, Yuki scolds Kana for what she just did. 1 for essentially handing them over to Friend, but 2 for running off again without regard to her own safety. Yuki breaks down, saying that she could never face Kenji again if something happened to her. Then Kana shows Yuki the rest of Kenji's song. Just a good moment. Let's pick up with Friend's side again. We see Takasu is still crazy for Friend. She hears about these sources all over the globe and is happy things are proceeding as planned. She also fills us in on what Friend has been researching. Genetic research, clone research, brain transplantation. It looks like Takasu is pregnant with Friend's child. Friend has found a way to live forever. So this is a bit of a bombshell. Takazu has been horny for being the Holy Mother for a while now. It seems like she got her wish. Plus, Friend is looking for ways to become immortal and seems to have found it. From the way this is staged, Takazu might just mean that Friend has light immortality. He's made a baby, possibly a clone, that functionally keeps him alive. Though it could also refer to some heavy immortality as well, a way to keep his consciousness alive forever. This is an idea that we'll swing back to later on. Friend himself sends a message to the UN as world president. He prophesies that aliens are coming and the Mars Immigration Project is humanity's only chance at survival. We have been seeing a few references of this so far. Friend sending a rocket to Mars, claiming that they were the first colonists, using some cheeky CG to make it look like they arrived. In reality, they lost contact with the rocket. Like most of Friend's regime, it's image over substance. We get a flashback of Friend's childhood. We see another kid is running around with Sadakio's mask. He's part of Fukubei's friend group and tries to add his own ideas into the new Book of Prophecy, though these are all shut down by Fukubei. We also get to see the start of arguably the most important flashback. We see from the perspective of Friend inside his mask on the day Kenji took over the loudspeaker. He thinks, is this world needed? Am I needed? But that's all that we get for the moment. Then Friend makes another announcement to the world. This time, he straight up tells everyone that the virus, the sources, the bloody New Year's Eve was all him. He did everything. And just as God made the world in 1 week, Friend will destroy the world in 1 week. I'm not talking about the world building, I'm not talking about the world building. The gang figure out that the expo ground is the only place that the sources aren't flying. So now the goal is to find a way to gather as many people as they can to the expo grounds. They raid the broadcast facility where Friend sent his message out, only to find everyone dead inside. They also find Masuo and Conchi. Now these two have had this whole side plot throughout the End of the World chapters. Conchi has been the one playing Bob Lennon over the radio. Kenji ran into him a few years back and recorded the song for him. He's actually an original member of Kenji's gang, though we've barely seen him. So far, he's shown up in the house on the Hanging Hill, and that's it. Now he's getting some extra flashback moments to make him look like he was part of the gang all along. I honestly want to say it feels like a bit of an odd addition. This may be a hot take, but Conchi being a member of Kenji's gang doesn't really add much to the story, despite making all our heroes somehow related to Kenji. It's another instance of, oh, if Conchi was this important as part of the original gang, he really should have come up well before now. He even got a message in preparation for the bloody New Year's Eve. He's that core to the team. Now, there has been some mention of him right at the start of the series. Likewise, if you're paying close attention, you know that Friend told Kenji at the start to summon the 9 to fight against him. The 9 people including Conchi as one of the core gang. It's just a bit strange that when the crew are wondering which person from their past Friend could be, not once is Conchi's name mentioned. As for Masuo, he feels bad for having shot Friend, but believes the real one died in 2014. Now he's allied himself with Conchi to stop this Friend. We won't see him again until the final showdown. Conchi puts Kenji's song over the radio. We've seen Bob Lennon as the song of hope so far in this series. It's the rally cry for people living under the thumb of Friend. Sane has also mass distributed Kenji's song based on the cassettes that she got from Kana. Kana herself remembers the Woodstock discussion that she had with Kenji and decides to announce a music festival. It will be held at the expo grounds and the singer of Bob Lennon will definitely be there. So please, just come. Kazumi goes and recruits the Aero Essims, Haro finds the old bassist from Kenji's band and they get ready for his return. Kiriko, meanwhile, is making moves to mass produce her vaccine. Kirion and Maruo take the first batch into the city, picking up Sadakio along the way, who's alive and well. The trouble begins when a spy in Yosh's crew gets the remote for the new robot and gives it to Friend. Then the robot wakes up right in the heart of Yosh's gang. It starts walking out and Osho jumps on board, climbing it just like Kenji did all those years ago. Meanwhile, Chono arrests Evil Cop. This is the guy that killed Cho at the start and became chief of police thanks to Friend. He says something really intriguing here. He says the current Friend was the previous one, before Fukubei took over. Meaning, this Friend was doing things before Fukubei became the main Friend. He also gives us a clue that something is inside the Tower of the Sun. A bit earlier on, Chono talked about seeing a child inside the same tower, saying, "Kenji-kun, let's play." With the robot running loose, Yosh's gang assaults the Friend base. We get this great moment of Yosh talking down the guards, and this got so close to being in my top 5. Damn it, Yosh, you're just the best. This results in Takazu fighting Yuki, saying that Friend told her everything. Kenji is not qualified to have the symbol of justice. We'll learn soon that this is actually crucial information to understanding this friend. The people make their way to the expo ground and Kana passes out from overexertion. After seeing the plan finally working, she lets herself stop. We get a few key flashbacks here. We see Friend taking the Space Justice badge with Kenji watching, then Kenji running away from Gigi Barber's shortly afterwards. Again, we'll soon learn that this is also crucial information. Kenji makes it to where the robot is just as Maruo does. There's a convenient truck there that they take to follow the robot. This is a Friend plant. Friend has set up this whole chase just for Kenji. Inside, Maruo sits on a Justice badge and Friend starts talking to them over a pre-tuned radio. Friend's directions end up taking them further away from the robot, into a recreation of their childhood neighborhood. The destination is the old school where Friend stands, controller in hand. Friend threatens Kana with the robot, saying Kenji is the evil one here, telling him to remember or he'll kill Kana. If you don't remember, I'll step on your little girl. But Kana herself wakes up, finally giving us the scene from the first chapter. We've been waiting for it, and here it is. It's important to understand what the robot symbolizes for Kana. It's the thing that took away her uncle, her closest family member. There's a good case that there's a lot of emotional trauma built around this robot for her. And seeing it again now evokes quite the reaction. She lets out a full-strength psychic scream which completely disables the robot. Kenji, meanwhile, apologizes to Friend. It's all over. Our game is over now. Friend starts freaking out. Why did you have to remember? Friend, mate, you just threatened to kill Kana if you didn't. So Friend pulls out a remote control to send the flying saucers to kill all the gathered people at the expo. Except they were already kind of headed that way anyway. In the previous chapter, we saw that they were already flying to the expo. So this is really just an empty threat. Then Sada pops up and restrains Friend. We see Ocho manage to take down 2 of the 3 saucers, Masuo gets the last one, a kamikaze attack which drops the saucer right on top of Sada and Friend. Cut ahead to the concert. Kenji arrives and says something drowned out by the crowd. He then jams with his old band, but he doesn't play Bob Lennon. This is actually a pretty bittersweet moment for Kenji. At this point, it's safe to assume Kenji knows who Friend is. Otherwise, this whole apology we just went through is completely disingenuous. But for now, Kenji gets to achieve both his childhood goals. He stopped Friend and saved the world, a defender of justice. Now he's playing his guitar to a crowd much bigger than the Budokan. They don't play Bob Lennon though. This always felt like a weird choice. There's certainly a statement in not playing that song, but it's not exactly clear what it is. Bob Lennon has always been the song of hope through this series. It's bonded people together, it's given them the strength to push on, to hope for a life better than the one they had under Friend. And perhaps that is the reason. Friend has been defeated, so it's time for people to look for their own hope. This is symbolized through Kenji playing the song to Friend while he dies, the song spiritually dying alongside him. Then again, maybe not. This is one of those ending threads that are left up to the reader's interpretation. There will be some more of these to come and are pretty part and parcel for Urasawa endings. I think it's important to point out the tone that this sets as well. Not playing Bob Lennon gives a feeling that this is unfinished, that things aren't quite settled yet. This isn't the happy ending. In the movies, they do play Bob Lennon here, and admittedly, it's pretty fun, seeing everyone getting hyped when Kenji breaks into It's just a great moment, but it does feel a lot like the happy ending moment. Now in the movies this works because it doesn't go on to do the whole 21st Century Boys plot. The only thing left after this is Kenji's final trip into the VA. For us in the manga, there's still a whole nother hurdle we have to overcome before we get to our ending. After the set ends, Kenji leaves the stage and gives his hat to Kana once again. This is mirroring the time he left her originally, now bringing it full circle for when they reunite at last. Kana finally hugs Kenji and lets herself cry. Part relief, mostly grief. This is such a fleeting moment in the manga, so again, let's see how the movies handle this. It goes on for a while, but this is another time of just the simple addition of hearing what's happening, elevating the material, giving it a lot more of the punch that a few panels can't quite achieve. The final part of 20th Century Boys is Kenji inside the virtual attraction, saying that he's got some more work to do to his younger self. Then we jump straight into 21st Century Boys. We see what happens when the saucer crashed. Sadakio miraculously survived and gets rushed to the hospital. Friend does not fare so well, being impaled. Kenji takes off his mask to confirm that he does look the exact same as Fukube. Friend asks for Kenji to play that song, so Kenji plays Bob Lennon as Friend dies for real this time. Flashback to Gigi Barber's. One of the Space Justice badges is missing. Barber is looking for the one who stole it and sees Friend walking around with it on. We see this past Friend tell Fukube that he had a dream where Yamane killed him. He goes on to say, the anti-proton bomb, and with that, the world will end. That's what adult me said in the dream anyway. So here's our final plot. There's an anti-proton bomb left behind that could destroy the world. With that threat, the UN comes in to formally depose Friend. We meet this profiler whose job it is to figure out Friend. He shows Kenji the final page of the new Book of Prophecy. Now Kenji needs to jump back into the VA to figure out where it's hiding. We get the romance story of Kenji and Yukiji, them being so close to getting together so many times. Urasawa, the absolute champ that he is, actually brings up Yamaguchi again, leaving my jaw dropped. I honestly thought this was a drop plot point, but alas, Urasawa has been keeping better track of the story than I'd given him credit for. We see the gang are celebrating the defeat of Friend, but Kenji isn't there with them. I guess a good parallel to make would actually be Frodo from Lord of the Rings. The journey broke him, took too much from him, that he can't return to the place he came from. Kenji is much the same. He can't connect back with his old group of friends. Too much has happened, and to a degree, Kenji feels responsible. Back inside the VA, Kenji sees Manjome. It looks like his consciousness ended up here after he died. Man talks about meeting this other friend. The ones who will take control are the imitations of the imitations. He imitates Fukube, who imitates Kenji. He also says that the bomb is at the expo. We then get one of the major flashbacks. We see Barber catching Friend and calling him a thief. Now, we know he's not. We saw him leave his prize ticket earlier, but now he's being called out with seemingly everyone watching, including Kenji. Fukube says that he just died, and this is probably where that rumor started. Back with Kana, she's with Chono at Sada's hospital bed. Kana tells him that Kenji said, "You didn't turn out like I'd hoped." Wow, okay, this hurts. Kana finally got to reconnect with her uncle, and he hits her with the old, "I'm not mad, just disappointed." Where is this coming from? Well, time and again, we're reminded that Kenji says, if you get into trouble, just run. Please just stay alive. And Kana's been doing the exact opposite. Remember, she got the message wrong. She believed Kenji never ran away, so she's been doing the same. Apart from, Kenji did run away and would have wanted Kana to choose being safe as well. It's about now that you'll realize Kana didn't actually do much in stopping Friend up to this point, but we'll circle back to that in the next section. The UN then arrive to talk to Sada. Kana says that she will get the answers that they need first. Then she gets a psychic message from the unconscious Sada. The switch is in the old secret base. Friend had recreated his whole old neighborhood, down to even having the secret base in a field. The UN guys are about to arrest Kana when the rest of the gang show up and free her by force. They even take the UN general hostage. Meanwhile, Kenji helps the young Friend inside the VA. It seems like this Friend is aware of what's going on in the outside world and is toying with Kenji. When he takes his mask off, it's the egghead underneath. Kenji then gets a message from Kana and manages to get Manjome to send one back, exchanging information about where the bomb and its switch are. Another thing that we're going to hit in the magic section. Then, Manjome's consciousness starts to fade. He tries bending a spoon for a final time, only to be surprised when it does. Then he functionally dies. I mean, the spoon bending, you did this earlier, buddy. Come on, you're telling me you actually brought pre-bent spoons that match the diners with you and managed to sleight of hand exchange them without these two lawyers noticing? And I mean, you didn't really do it now. You're in a simulation, right? I get that this is trying to be an emotional note for Man to leave on, but it really doesn't land. These chapters have tried to sympathize Man, paint him up as more of a redeemed character. He regrets what he did, then turned against Friend and now is helping to stop his final plans. This moment of the spoon bending being a nice send-off for a redeemed character. I don't buy it. Man has helped facilitate Friend's mass murdering of massive chunks of humanity. This wasn't a character we really wanted to see get a nice ending, and the nice ending that's built doesn't really work. Anyway, Man is now gone. Outside, Kana and Yuki head to the base. It looks like our final villain is the daughter of Professor Shikishima. She's still Team Friend because apparently she's never learned what a sunk cost is. She restarts the robot and it begins heading towards the secret base. Kana uncovers the button. She realizes it's much too big for her to stop, having a mini meltdown because she can't do anything to stop the robot. She laments how futile her powers are to enact real change. We see her come back to this idea more than once, seeing her powers as just trivial tricks made manifest. Here's the quote from this scene as the robot heads towards her. "Why are my powers only good for bending spoons? What a pointless power." Kana, buddy, you remember when you might have killed this lady with your powers? When you blew up her car? When you sent psychic messages that got Kenji out of the VA? I don't understand why you keep calling your powers useless spoon bending when you know you can do more. You even stopped this exact robot with your powers some 20 chapters ago. What are you talking about? Honestly, I think this is just a bit of a ham-fisted way to set up this next line. You're everyone's special treasure, but that's not because you have any special powers. That's just because you are important to us. And yes, I guess that's the point. It's about the connection between the characters. Stop thinking about the powers. Then Kana uses her powers to get a vision of where the controller for the robot is. Yuki runs off to go kick ass, and again we'll leave the magic there until the end when we take a deeper dive into it. It's now that Kenji rides in to fight the robot. We get this great little montage of all the side characters reacting to what's happening. It's a nice way to get everyone we've met in the story and all these threads into this moment. Sane calls up the radio to put on Bob Lennon, and Kenji climbs up to the control room. He uses an old trick that Yuki taught him to essentially sweep the leg, and the robot comes crashing down. I'm in a bit of two minds about using Bob Lennon as the song here. Part of me says that it's a great choice because it's essentially the song of hope in the story. It's what the people have rallied around, the song that literally got Kenji here to stop the robot. On the other hand, this whole moment is a repeat of the start, where we had 20th Century Boy going, the song that made Kenji feel invincible. It would have been cool to see that reincorporated into this showdown. Though perhaps there is an angle here that Kenji doesn't feel invincible anymore, having a better idea of what his role was in the creation of Friend. Either way, I do like the addition of some sort of musical accompaniment in this scene. We then cut to revisit the UN shot from the opening, that shot that built this whole series. This time it's Kenji's crew coming out as the saviors of humanity. Yosh gets to give a speech, even Mabo and Yanbo are there. But Kenji is not. He's gone back into the virtual attraction. He says he's got some past mistakes to correct. He gets young Kenji to do all the things he should have done back then. He says goodbye to Sadakio when he moves and asks to stay in touch. He tells Baba the truth about who stole the badge of justice. He apologizes to Friend and says that he'll tell everyone the truth. He kind of confesses to Yuki, all with older Kenji looking on nostalgically. It's sort of a catharsis for him, I guess, seeing at least some version of him correcting his mistakes. These things that seemed trivial at the time, but meant so much all these years later. I mean, the whole back end of the story has revolved around Friend getting revenge for Kenji stealing the badge. It all comes back to this moment at Gigi Baba's. We then see Kana make her way to Africa with Chono and her grandmother in the search for Kiriko. Kiriko is still traveling the world to spread the vaccine. Then mother and daughter finally get to meet, and it's incredibly brief. Kiriko is still too busy helping people. Kana runs off to do what she can too, using her powers to help bring water to the village. Despite how short it is, even this short reaction still hits. The series has spent a long time building up this connection between mother and daughter. Just seeing them reunite is enough to get a reaction from us. Our last tale to follow is of Friend's backstory. We pick up right where we left off, with Friend wondering if he's needed. He heads to the roof to jump off, but right before he can, 20th Century Boy starts playing. He climbs back down. To the roof walks young Kenji, and Friend asks if they can be friends. Young Kenji says sure. Then Friend starts to leave. Kenji says, "Hey, you're Katsumata, right?" Ending the series on a final reveal. One last recontextualization of everything we've just seen. A chance to close the book and be left with what that means for what we've just read. Seeing Kenji just listen to music on the roof as we pan out. A nice bookend to how the series opened. And then we get the actual ending page of God waiting for the bowling boom. Alrighty, it's time to start unpacking this ending, but I'm going to start with the most trivial part of this section. Why on earth does God and Kazumi get the final page? You did it, Urasawa, you gave us a perfect spot to end. A final reveal that harkens back to the opening panels, making this whole story feel a certain cohesion. Of all we talk about on the ending, having the final moments reflect the start of the series with fresh context was fantastic. Let's pick up how the series started. The story opens in 1973 with Kenji taking over the school radio to play rock and roll. He thinks something will happen, the power of rock and roll, but nothing happened. But nothing is shown to us to have happened. Nothing seemed to have happened, but in fact it was one of the most history-changing moments of the whole series. That's brilliant, what a space to end. But no, we get this little end-page stinger about God not going to die yet. What a way to deflate the impact of what just happened. This bothers me so much because it's just such a simple fix. Cut the last page, leave it blank, or just pan out further on Kenji on the roof. Done. Fixed. So, 21st Century Boys. All in all, it's honestly a mixed bag. There are some really strong moments, but also some of the weakest in the series. We've got the final reveal of Katsumata, the anti-proton bomb, Kana meets Kiriko, the last robot with the daughter of Professor Shikishima. Let's start with Kana. Did Kana really not do much in stopping Friend? Yeah, she didn't achieve much. Yamane kills Fukube, Ocho takes out the two saucers, Kenji liberates the villages, Conchi and Sane share the Song of Hope, Katsumata dies to the crashing saucer from Masuo, Sada fights to keep Kazumi safe, Kiriko stops the New Book of Prophecy and the end of the world viruses. So what did Kana do? She stopped the assassination of the Pope, but considering later events, that was probably doomed to fail anyway. She attempted to assassinate Friend, but didn't follow through. She got everyone together at the expo to save them from the virus, but we know Friend was going to drop the virus there anyway. In fact, from the way it's written, it seems like the expo was ground zero for the last virus deployment. Kana possibly just made it easier for Friend. The big thing she did was stop the robot that was only reawakened to step on her. For most of the series, Kana didn't actually help much by being around. I mean, as a point of view character, she's been great and someone we've enjoyed following. As a hero of the story, she's been fantastic and a lot of fun to follow. I mean, just purely from a stopping Friend perspective, she didn't help. And that's why I actually like this moment of her saying that Kenji was disappointed in her. I've been endeared to this character and it hurts to hear. But with the context of the whole series, she absolutely could have run away like Kenji did. Fulfill his last wish to get away from danger. Fulfill her mother's wish to live a happy life. But she didn't do either. She stuck around in a dangerous place that left her just as broken as her uncle, falling to a place so hopeless she was about to throw herself and all her followers at Friend in a kamikaze-style attack. That's great. You might not put those pieces into place until you hear her say this line. At first I thought this was just an unnecessarily cruel thing for Kenji to say, but it makes sense. It's a great spot to reflect on what she actually has done thus far, or rather, what she hasn't. Thankfully, 21st Century Boys actually gives her something important to do, though it is admittedly disappointing that that something important is ultimately just a way for Urasawa to send messages between characters that shouldn't be able to speak to each other. I won't lie, hearing it explained as spoken to her heart just felt wrong for this series. Now, I don't mind the line itself. I mean, I'm a Shaman King fan and we get this sort of dialogue all the time. The problem is that it stands out so much because no one speaks like this through the whole series. Yes, there's magic and robots and space lasers, but 20th Century Boys, at its core, is a grounded story. People speak and act like human beings. Friend and his followers are crazy, but our heroes don't speak like this. It feels like a very clumsy way to explain how she's sending messages to a computer program. Again, we'll get into more of this when we look at the magic. What about the final plot, though? The anti-proton bomb, Shikishima's daughter, and the robot powering up again. For those paying close attention, the anti-proton bomb is a completely new idea for 21st Century Boys. It's not brought up once in the mainline series. There are allusions to Friend wanting to put his toys away and destroy the world, though most of those have seemed related to the final virus, the whole final plot of 20th Century Boys. We've actually been getting this idea of Friend destroying the world from the very start, but again, that always seemed to come across as metaphorical, like destroying the current state of the world. Likewise, there have been allusions to something in the Tower of the Sun. Chono says that he heard a child laughing inside, but no mention of anything more. Then 21st Century Boys hits us with the anti-proton bomb idea, and it doesn't really land. Up until now, there has always been a person, a personification, a symbol to fight against. But those have all been resolved. Friend is gone, our central pillar, our main threat, has been defeated. Now this reveal of the anti-proton bomb feels like a weak way to increase the stakes. You thought Friend was done? Haha! No way, Jose! Look at this thing that was totally foreshadowed. It's a moving of the goalpost without any of the core support for it. Most of this series has been built around Friend, the mystery of who is he and why is he doing this. 21st Century Boys tries to ride this balance of uncovering the final mysteries, but also trying to increase the stakes. What's worse than another virus wiping out humanity? What if we blew up the Earth? The problem is that we've lost the personal stake, and that was fundamental to why 20th Century Boys has worked as a series. These are the final chapters, and the problems have been resolved. Now we can wrap up what we're most interested in. Who is Friend? But no, there's yet another hurdle to overcome before we get there, and it's just not compelling. If you told me halfway through this story that it'll end in a race against time as another robot like the one on the bloody New Year's Eve tries to activate an anti-proton bomb that'll destroy the world, I'd be into that. That sounds awesome. But then if you said it would have nothing to do with the main mystery of Friend, now it feels like an obstacle that we're just waiting to be removed so we can finally get to the answers that we're waiting for. Yes, it's cool to see Kenji face down another robot, but this doesn't feel as impactful as it did the first time. Yes, it's great to see Shikishima's daughter again, but she doesn't have an impact at all. The robot is just autopiloting to the button. It's crazy how something this dramatic just ends up feeling like filler until we get to the answers that we're waiting on. Speaking of which, let's talk about the Katsumata reveal. So Katsumata was Friend 2, or kind of Friend 1, well the only friend, it's a bit odd. But the reveal itself. I think this was something the series was going to struggle to land no matter who was behind the mask. The whole first half of the series is setting up Fukube as Friend, seeing things like his childhood home recreated with Sada watching over it, or the lies of 1970 and 71 in the virtual attraction. Then, once he's revealed, we get his backstory, which serves to explain his central motivations. Then, the final third is only in service of unmasking this new friend, and not so much understanding him. His motivations coming down to a single moment, rather than different aspects of a character weaving themselves together. I think it's only fair to look at Katsumata's reveal in the light of already having gotten Fukube's. Now, an idea the series touches on, particularly around Friend, is the one of imitation. Fukube imitates Kenji, writing his own book of prophecy and turning himself into the hero. Katsumata imitates Fukube, who imitates Kenji. There's even a line about it near the end. The ones who will rule the world are the imitations of the imitations. A key parallel to make is that Katsumata is another character that was forgotten. Fukube wasn't remembered by any of the gang when he joined. Katsumata goes a step further and was someone truly forgotten by the main cast, having believed him to be dead since school days. Whether this is a clever reintegration of the idea or a created cliche, I'll leave up to you. I think Urasawa has done a fantastic job of making the reader aware of this Katsumata character without ever seeing him named in any flashbacks. Nearly every time the science room is brought up, the characters will make an offhand mention to Katsumata. And somehow, it always feels natural, but it sets the idea of this character into your head. It makes this final reveal a, wait, what kind of moment? We have an idea of who this character is, but now we learn he was never dead. Does it work as a twist ending? Honestly, I don't think so. Yes, it's a twist, and it does change the whole bloody New Year's Eve, because we can be pretty sure that was at least mostly Katsumata, but it's not a twist that we were given the clues to figure out. Neither does it really change how you reread the latter half of this series knowing the reveal. And that comes down to the fact that Katsumata-era Friend is just worse than Fukube's. Katsumata simply is a less developed character, but we'll leave that there until we get into our big Friend talk. Let's take a look at themes. What was the message? What was the point of the story? As a character-led journey, the main idea is of moving on and growing up. Whether that be through the flashbacks, the time jumps, the villain's motivations, whatever, it's all through this series. This idea of not just casting aside your past to grow into something new, but to recognize and accept who you used to be. A synthesis of who you were, who you are, and who you want to be. I would call this 20th Century Boys' central theme, one perfectly positioned in a seinen series. It's aimed at an older demographic who will be going through similar circumstances. The younger readers wondering who they want to become, the older working on understanding who they are, and the oldest looking back to reconcile their history to who they ended up as. It's like a coming-of-age story, but also a retrospective on that story. Not just coming into your adulthood, but also a criticism of that. Not everyone is happy with the people and the lives they grew into. I wonder if we're the adults now that we dreamed of being back then, or if our childhood selves would laugh at us if they saw us now. It's a tough thing to confront, but 20th Century Boys quite clearly sends the message that it's something you should do nonetheless. Maybe this is most clearly seen with the villains. A key line about this comes from Friend after Kana takes him hostage. He refers to himself as a 20th century boy. We smile and say, oh, he said the thing, but this was a true statement. Katsumata is a 20th century boy. He's still stuck in his 20th century mindset from when he was a kid. He never moved on. All his motivations stem back to this moment as a child that he could never get past. Likewise with Fukube, his motivations stem back to these key points in his childhood, things that aren't too world-changing objectively, but meant so much to the character. The lies of 1970, 71, and the New Book of Prophecy makes up the basis of Friend's whole regime. Fukube still chasing the renown that he was deprived of as a child. To the point, his closest allies are afraid of being killed just from knowing the truth of 1970 and 71. The villains are the ones who got stuck deifying the past and built an empire around it. And when the bad guys are doing it, that's generally a pretty clear indication that the author means this is what not to do. But they're not the only ones. The series is called 20th Century Boys, after all. Even our main hero in Kenji fights with this too. Kenji spends his time running from his past. That whole questionable amnesia plot meant to show that. Note that he's literally removed from the story until he learns to accept his own past. Kenji spends the entire time between the Bloody New Year's Eve and the resurrection of Friend running from remembering his past. All the while, things just go from bad to worse for the main cast. It's only when he comes to accept his past, both from his childhood mistakes and his adult failures, that he comes back as a hero. I like it as a message. It's a good message. We're each on our own journeys. Some of us despise our histories, but nonetheless, they're still the things that brought us to where we are. Things that have helped build us into the human beings that we are today. We shouldn't be so caught up in them that we don't grow and evolve. Neither should we disregard them as not having an influence in who we are. We learn from our past, our mistakes or successes, and try to become better people. That's a journey that we're all on. To compare to another Urasawa story, this is a way 20th Century Boys sets up Billy Bat years later. That series goes on to explore finding your purpose in life and what kind of change do we want to make in the world. A natural sort of extension on what 20th just looked at. Honestly, right now I kind of consider Billy Bat a spiritual successor to 20th Century Boys. So many themes and ideas are pulled through into that series. Yeah, I'm a big Billy fan, you should absolutely read it. You could definitely pull out a different theme or message from the story, and all power to you. At the end of the day, we're human beings and we come at stories as ourselves, our own biases drawing attention to the things that resonate more with us. If you think this whole story is about how we need to be more skeptical of those with power, then cool, man, glad you found something to engage with. I'm genuinely stoked that the story connected with you deeper than just the text. That's one of the things I love about discussing these series, seeing how someone with a different perspective pulls a completely different conclusion from the same content. And wouldn't you know it, you guys delivered when I was making this video. Now I've kindly got permission to share a take that Zach made on the Friend inspiration video, the messages and the connections that he found in this series. Particularly, pulling out connections between events happening before, during, and slightly after the writing of the series. The economic struggles and the lost decade in Japan, the global financial crisis that caused a lot of people a lot of grief, how the cult that inspired Friend preyed upon that to grow so quickly. Also, in how Urasawa's writing is in a sense a response to that, showing heroes that resist against the groupthink that these cults push, that the reader themselves are going to be okay. Let me pull out a few of his final comments here. I think that one of the purposes of these series was to create heroes that resist against the comfortable solution of sublimating into groupthink. In my opinion, Urasawa tried to use his art to affect change in a subtle and compassionate way in order to show his readers that they aren't alone and that they are stronger than they know. I think Urasawa's work is exemplary because it shows protagonists who are never certain what's happening and are constantly in a state of self-inquiry. They're never Gokus or Luffys. They aren't comfortable thinking that they are absolutely correct or that they'll always win. I think the lesson he imparts isn't to be paranoid and fearful. The lesson is that a true hero is one who can be wrong, can fail, and be completely terrified. And despite all of that, they choose to experience these painful feelings inherent to materiality, rather than allowing themselves to feel safe and warm within an inoperable ideology. Hot dog, this is why I love discussing these series. Seeing how different people pull out things or conceptualize or the connections that they make is so interesting. A story will always go deeper than just what you read. When you try to take an earnest look at a piece of art, you will always be guided by your own opinions, though that can leave you blind to other ideas that are in there. And this is why hearing other perspectives is so important. We get to a deeper understanding of the material, and we save ourselves from being echo-chambered into oblivion. If you've got hot takes on the messages in this series, now's your time to drop them in the comments. All through working on this video, I have been dying for some honest takes on what this series means to people. Let's circle back to the ending before we finish up this section. It's a mixed bag. There are moments that just simply feel unpolished. After Kenji apologizes, Friend freaks out, saying, "Why did you have to remember?" And in the previous chapter, Friend says, "If you don't remember, I'll step on your little girl." So, of course, Kenji was going to remember. What else was he going to do? Just let Kana be killed? It's awkward. Friend sends the sources to the expo twice. We see Yanbo and Mabo react to them going there the first time, and then again in the next chapter, Friend threatens to send them to the expo with the remote. Is this an elaborate bluff? They're already going there. In video terms, it just feels a bit janky. When Kenji takes his final trip into the VA, he says goodbye to Sadakio as he's leaving. Sada takes off his mask and he has a face, his childhood face. Remember when this was a pretty major plot point 100 chapters ago, that Sada had no photos of him as a child? You're telling me that Sada fled without taking this very key piece of memorabilia, and then the Friend team found the photo and had it uploaded into the VA with zero references to it? After spending 250 chapters carefully setting up this mystery, it's moments like these that chip away at how strong the story is. Like we said right at the start, the general perception is that 20th Century Boys has an amazing start, but the longer it goes on, the more it falls in quality. 21st Century Boys doesn't hit anywhere near the heights of those first 50 chapters. This all builds into what is probably going to be a hot take. One of the biggest weaknesses in Urasawa stories are the endings. I don't think Naoki Urasawa is that good at wrapping up his stories. Taking a look at his big series, the main criticisms all sit on the endings, each having some strange additions, unclear motivations, or things that just don't work. Monster's ending has the perfect suicide, this idea of Johan killing off everyone who knew him before being killed at the hands of Tenma. Except, there's still a bunch of people he left alive who know him, so this idea doesn't really work. My explanation was always that the whole idea was a red herring, because otherwise, it makes no sense. Pluto's ending feels really rushed. The reveal of Bora and the startling quick escalation to the end of the world catches you off guard, only to be pretty succinctly wrapped up. Then you get this half-stinger ending with Brow killing the teddy bear. Billy Bat has kind of 3 endings, and the final reveals of what Billy Bat is are pretty lackluster. It feels like the whole story went too vague on what Billy was, and then struggled to pull all the threads together at the end, leaving Billy with an ending that only gives a satisfying wrap-up to certain parts of the series. That's not to say that everything in Urasawa endings are bad, not at all. Clearly there are things that he's had in mind since the early days of the series that finally get to come around in the ending, like the Pharaoh's Curse in Billy Bat, or the whole reveal and conclusion with Bonaparte in Monster. These become really strong moments in the series. I would say Katsumata's reveal is one of these moments. I do have a slew of problems with it, but the core idea of bringing it right back to chapter 1 with some fresh context is fantastic. This does bring up the other main reason I think Urasawa struggles in his endings though. In the stories he makes, he goes too hard. He opens so many threads, so many ideas, so many characters, that it becomes this Herculean task trying to wrap them all up. As a result, some parts end up feeling lackluster, and that's the problem with writing so broadly. Different readers will pick up on different ideas as their focus. If you can't neatly wrap together everything you've opened, someone is going to be disappointed. Now see, you're probably saying, a major part of Urasawa stories is this ambiguity. In your own video on Monster, you praise its ending for that ambiguity, a way for readers to reach their own conclusions, just like we'd been following the Johan case ourselves. It's something that makes that series really memorable because you don't know if the monster is still out there or not. And you'd be absolutely correct, that's a fair point. But there's a difference, I feel, between intentional ambiguity and unintentional ambiguity. The ending of Monster is a good example of the former. The ambiguity is a way to affirm your character profile on Johan and personalize the series. Is the empty bed ominous, sad, hopeful, bittersweet? That's your call as the reader. What is your take on Johan's actions, his history, his trauma? Has he done too much to be redeemed? Did he have any agency in his choices after so much abuse? Should he be dead? Should he be going to find his mother? Should he be comatose for the rest of his days? I think it works really well. You're passing a moral judgment that speaks to your view of Johann as much as it does your own sense of justice. Unintentional ambiguity is where the questions that arise don't feel retrospective or part of the message of the story. Rather, they just feel like ideas the author couldn't find answers to in time and so left it up for the audience to figure out. The biggest ones I find in 20th Century Boys are the magic system and Friend himself. Friend, of course, being the most important one, considering the whole series is built around him. So let's talk about those. Okay, it's time to talk about the magic system, and I will admit this whole section will come off as pretty negative. The magic in this series does a great job of building tension, tone, and mystery, us as readers wondering what's real and what's showmanship. However, it also opens a lot of problems that the series never addresses. Problems that hurt the ending, the characters, and the mystery in retrospect, promising answers that are never given. 20th Century Boys does use magic, that's just an unavoidable fact of the series, though it does try its best to overlook a lot of the more problematic aspects of its inclusion, trying to build it up as more pointless spoon-bending and not the robot-stopping screeing. When you're looking at a series with magic, the first question that comes up is what sort of system are they using, soft or hard magic? If you need a crash course in what those are, I'll leave some links in the description. The one I would recommend for 20th Century Boys is this one here by Hello Future Me, A Defense of Soft Magic Systems. In this video, Tim talks about how soft magic is best used in more character-focused journeys, which 20th is, where setups and payoffs are around characterization rather than clever uses of the magic system, rather than the characters using some hard established rule to get what they want. I don't disagree with him here. Billy Bat is one of my favorite Urasawa stories, and its main magic, Billy Bat, makes no sense even at the end. It's a very soft system. It's built as an intentionally character-focused magic. The story even tells you that point blank. That being said, this defense applies to series where the soft magic system actually does facilitate these character actions, heightening them and making them hit harder. The magic works to reinforce the character journeys as the main focus. We can play around with different ideas that would normally feel awkward by introducing a magical aspect. Having a magical bat explain how he told you a bunch of evil garbage because that's what you wanted to hear is much more approachable than the character just expositing that they've realized they were wrong all along. The struggle comes in when the magic blurs the lines around what we're supposed to understand about the characters. It's been a hot minute since the start of the video, so let me refresh what we talked about, though this time in the context of a properly developed magic system. Good world building helps us understand the greater context of a story. Without this, events can feel incredibly contrived, like the author is just making things happen and you have to accept that, which can lead to some incredibly awkward moments. Take the ending of Fallout 3, for example.
When you go to ask Fox to stop the purifier from exploding, he tells you that this is your destiny. Like legit, this guy is immune to radiation. He cannot die from this. And he tells you, now you gotta do this, man. This is your destiny, dude. You gotta do this. Like, the ending cinematic even goes, but the Vault Dweller did not follow in his father's footsteps. He was not brave enough, and instead sent in a true hero to stop the purifier from exploding. My guy, the true hero is immune to radiation. How does this make me less of a hero? It just makes me smart. Next you'll tell me that I've been in a coma for 60 years and my son is now the bad guy.
If you don't properly set up the world, important moments like this can fall completely short. 20th Century Boys has 3 characters that we can call intentionally magical characters, those being God, then Kana, and Katsumata. Fukube is magical too, but the series kind of wants us to believe it's all smoke and mirrors, so we'll keep him out for now. Likewise, I want to include Manjome in there, but again, the series tries to tell us that was all smoke and mirrors too, so we'll keep him out as well. Let's take God first and the use of prophecy in the story. I'd completely understand if you hate the idea in principle. Like Joseph Anderson said earlier, it's a cheap way for the author to puppet a character with information that they couldn't find a way to write naturally. I'd 100% agree with that phrasing. It's a cheap way. It's an incredibly efficient way. It's like exposition plus, like spicy tell don't show. But most of the uses of prophecy in this story are around setting up a tone rather than the plot. If you go through the story, you could reasonably take out all of the prophecies. I mean, the God ones, not the book ones. And the plot would stay the same. How it's used in the story is to let the audience know that something is coming. We'll cut to God ominously telling us that something bad is going to happen soon, setting up an expectation and a tone in the chapters to come. With the context of the whole story, it's only ever used for this reason, excluding some minor plot moments that really aren't that important, so I can't find an issue with its inclusion. But how about for the other characters? Well, that's where the holes start appearing. What is established actually hurts the characters and the themes more than it helps. When we first meet Kana, she's running out into the middle of a gang fight to save a ramen shop. She has some sort of power where people can't seem to hit her with bullets. The story is trying to show Kana as this bold person who, in a headstrong fashion, ran into the middle of danger to protect what she loves, a message that is repeated to us with the plan to stop the assassination of the Pope, and later in the assassination of Friend. She'll put herself in harm's way to protect what she values. But now, in this first moment, it doesn't work. Kana has this power which makes her considered bulletproof. This isn't a dangerous situation for her. If it was one gang or they were using knives or something, then yes, she's at risk, making the message actually correct. How it is now, there's not really a threat. The intended characterizing of Kana fails. She isn't actually this headstrong type, she can just do things that normal people can't. She's special. Running out to the noodle shop doesn't pose the risk it would anyone else. The established magic is counteracting the intended characterization. Through the series, we see she can actually do a whole lot of stuff. Blow up cars, stop giant robots, prophesy, ESP gamble, send psychic messages, force choke. It gives her this suite of powers that never make her feel overly in danger. This is one of the key issues with it all being so vague. When Kana gets into trouble, we have to wonder if we need to worry or if some magic will just come out of left field to save her. And that's not an unwarranted worry. That's how she survives Kenji's final showdown with Friend. But let's flip that coin. The magic itself is a literal expression of something internal, particularly heightened emotion. When things get heated is when the magic comes out. When Kana has a strong drive to recruit the gangs. When she learns that her actual father apparently killed her surrogate father. When the robot that initially took that father away comes back just as she was beginning to hope again. It's these moments that we see her biggest outbursts. Urasawa using the magic as simply a means to show don't tell what's going on behind the scenes. In this way, we can see the magic as a success. It communicates the inner turmoil of the characters in a much more evocative way than simply talking about it. We can't quite say the same for Katsumata, so quick catch up, Katsumata is a magical dude. We see his past self prophesying the things his future self would say. Beyond that, we don't actually see him do anything to the scale Kana does. He just tells Kana straight they experimented around her birth to make sure she got powers. The implication being the powers derive, at least in part, from Katsumata. It never seems like anyone has anywhere near the power that Kana has. It raises questions around what can Katsumata, what can Friend really do? Through the start of the series, we're getting glimpses of what seems like magic from Friend. He floats, he bends spoons, he has this almost hypnotic power over his followers. It all begs the question, magic or not magic? Can he compel people to follow him by using his abilities, or is this a comment on how people can get swept up in charismatic leaders? Or that there's a large population of people out there in desperate need of a friend, to the point that their morals are washed out by the power of groupthink? By the end of the series, we're never given concrete answers to this. What could Katsumata do? How much of the showmanship was real? You might say that's an engaging ambiguity, but you might also say that the magic only serves to muddy the waters on what we're supposed to understand about the Friend Party. Is there an intended message here, or is it just playing on the cult history? Let's go even broader. Why is the magic included at all? After going through the series like this, my only conclusion is that, well, besides the tone setting of course, it's a plot point. It's purely there as clues towards who Friend is. Friend could do magic, Kana, his daughter, can too. Beyond that, it doesn't serve to help the characters at all. You could take it out and nothing of value would be lost. Yes, some of Kana's characterization would be lost, likewise some of the tone setting in God's prophecies, but I honestly think Urasawa would not struggle to find alternate ways to show that. The man is a good writer. By the time we get to 21st Century Boys, the magic just starts evolving to help it all wrap up. The unconscious Sada can beam a message into Kana's head. Kana can send a message to a young Kenji in the VA, who is just a computer program. And then the consciousness of the dead man Jome that was uploaded and trapped into the VA can telepathically reply to Kana in the real world. What? This is one of the areas that I throw together with the world building. It's not overly strong in this series, and it serves to hinder more often than it helps. Its tone and mystery coming before the consistency and answers. I know different people will have their focus on different things, but for those like me who care about this stuff, it's not parts that we like. It adds to this feeling of an underwhelming ending, expected answers and explanations that never come. Overall, it hurts the mystery that we've been following by not presenting a satisfying conclusion. But despite all of that, I do honestly think that 20th Century Boys would feel incomplete without the magic. Yes, it's problematic, especially on a close reread, and Urasawa absolutely could have used something else to get the same results, but it still feels like a core part of this series. One of those things that shouldn't be removed, even if it turned out to be an improvement. We finally get to Friend. Friendy, friendy, friend. One of the interesting things you'll learn looking into the series is that no one discusses Friend. It's always an offhand comment that Friend is Friend. It seems the consensus is that most people see him as an imposing antagonist, this sinister figure that has connections running deep, always a few steps ahead with plans and machinations that go far beyond what you'd expect. His history tying back into the main characters, bringing this compelling narrative to uncover his identity. Overall, a perfect character to set up as the antagonist. And that's about as far as the discussion goes. If you'd like to look at the inspiration for Friend, I'll refer you to this video. Basically, it's got all the stuff that the algorithm doesn't like in it. There's the card if you want to segue through that first. The TLDR is that Friend, particularly the first 50 chapters Friend, is based upon a real group that did some overtly villainous activities in the 80s and 90s. It's a really key piece of Japanese modern history that ends up shaping 20th Century Boys. That group tried to do a lot of the things that Friend ends up succeeding at, painting this whole series as this horribly unsettling version of what could happen when a group like this succeeds in accumulating power. This is such important context for the start of the series, and it only serves to reinforce how great those opening chapters are. So, Friend. Conceptually, Friend is a fantastic foil in this series. Someone with connections to, but ambitions far past the main characters. Someone who moves from niche cult leader all the way up to president of the world. Someone who plays around with some of the key ideas of the series without ever overtly discussing them. So let's break down some of the ways that this is seen in the series. Seinen as a genre is typically targeted at the older male demographic, those that have moved on from their childhood enjoyment of shonen and are looking for something deeper to get into. A staple of old shonen stories is that classic line that we all meme on these days. It's all about the power of friendship, and with that, the heroes can conquer any challenge, no matter how absurd. 20th Century Boys, instead of abandoning the concept completely, turns it on its head. It's not our heroes, but our villain that embodies the power of friendship, taking it as their literal title. It's through the twisting of this idea that Friend accumulates power. We see near the end with Evil Cop, he talks about how Friend was there for him, told him he was good enough just the way he was. He was a friend. There's this meta-narrative of the villain taking over the mantle of the power of friendship, something usually reserved for the heroes, and that's exactly the point. The perception is that the heroes are the ones using the power of friendship and teamwork. Friend plays on that idea to become the hero of the story he's selling to the public. He's using friendship and teamwork, he must be the hero. And that's such a great concept. It ties back into his inspiration again. That group tried to manipulate ideas in the then modern Japanese culture to expand their influence, much like Friend is doing here. Friend tries to tell a narrative and get the world to believe it, and it succeeds. As we go on in the series, we see more and more that Friend is trying to sell this image of being the hero, setting up increasingly elaborate displays. The robot showdown, the resurrection, the alien invasion, it's all showmanship. Because if there's one thing Friend is, it's a showman. Giving the appearance of something even if it's all lies. The floating, the resurrection, even perhaps the spoon bending. We see this in how he affects the world too. The robot that only appears to but can't actually walk. The inner workings of Tomodachi Land. The castle on the wall that's actually just a front. The successful rocket trip to Mars. When Friend asserts something as true, he needs it to be true. Much like the castle, a lot of Friend is presentation or appearance first, substance second. This ties back into Fukube's backstory. He can't handle being called a fraud. He has an appearance he wants to maintain. See the Expo, the Teru Teru Bozu, or the Example Project. It doesn't matter what the truth actually is, it's whatever truth is believed. Image is everything. It's a very superficial worldview, a very childish worldview. Just make it look good, make it shiny and colorful, doesn't matter if it's bad content, just have a person with their mouth open in the thumbnail. Another big aspect of Friend is that he's stuck in the past. The things of his childhood still make up a lot of his motivation, whether they be the lies of 1970 and 71 for Fukube, or the badge of justice for Katsumata. Even in how Friend gets people to talk to him. Hooray for the world leader! It's also childish. See Haru's comments on what Friend looks like. When you live for 50 years, all of your life experiences are chiseled out on your face. However, Friend's face shows none of that. Like a child's? Both friends are still caught up in their childhoods, one from their mindset that they failed to grow past, the other from a single moment. Even in their goals, they all stem back to the plans they made as kids, recreating things from the various books of prophecy. This is how it ties back into one of the major themes of the series. Both villains represent being stuck in the past, failing to grow up or choosing not to, letting old hurts and haunts define your life. Eventually defeated by a character who embraces their past by choosing to grow and move on. So conceptually, Friend is fantastic and a perfect foil in 20th Century Boys. As a character in the story, however, I don't find Friend nearly as strong a villain. For me, part of this comes back to the world. It doesn't feel like Friend has manipulated his way into the hearts and the minds of the people. It feels like the world has been supporting him from the very start. Friend doesn't feel powerful, he feels favored by fate. As a person, he's running on very juvenile motivations that have been pushed to such an extreme that it feels outlandish. Let's compare him to the main villains of Urasawa's other most popular series. He kind of shot himself in the leg here because his previous series in Monster had an incredibly well-developed villain. Johan was trained and experimented on since birth to become this manipulative conqueror. Eventually, the training backfires, and he manufactures his own escape, going on to slowly accumulate power and wealth over the course of his life until he positioned himself as one of the most powerful people in the country, his allies either trying to use him for their own purposes or the ones he manipulated himself into action. All that based on trauma, abuse, and an incredibly nihilistic perspective on humanity. Then we have Goji in Pluto, a robot built to believe himself the real Professor Abula. He lost his family, his people, his nation, all due to an unjust war from power-hungry foreign influences. The deep scars the war inflicted on his nation are also cut deep into his psyche, driving him to almost destroy the whole planet in retribution on an unjust world that took everything from him, touching on ideas of extreme emotion, connection, and what makes us human. Billy Bat doesn't really have an overarching villain, but let's take the last one, Timmy. Someone radicalized as a child by their father, an illegitimate child growing up alone after the early death of his only loving parent, driven by a sole purpose of reclaiming his inheritance. As he starts to enact his plan, he gets manipulated into believing himself a prophet, believing the world is doomed by a slew of real-world modern issues. He spends the rest of his life attempting to create a safe haven for humanity, unknowingly creating the very world he is trying to save people from in the process. All the while fighting the truth that he might just be wrong, following ideas of prophecy, purpose, and predestination. Now let's take Friend again, a person who, via a warped worldview, fails to move on from their childhood. They manage to accumulate power by fabricating and fixing a global biological weapon attack, going on to recreate their childhood plans in order to meet their own psychotic need to be right, or simply to toy with their old classmate. The character themselves never growing or changing, but used as a vehicle to display the ideas of the series. It's a different type of villain to those other stories, and I don't think it's for the better. Friend is stronger as an idea than he is as a character. Admittedly, this may come down to the way I read Urasawa stories. I think Urasawa excels at character-centered journeys, and perhaps Friend is not meant to be viewed through this lens. We have the main cast of heroes that tick that box, whereas Friend is more conceptual and tied to themes and tone. Then again, if his character isn't important, why is the main mystery figuring out his identity? But again, I don't think it's a tough call at all to say Urasawa can do both character and concept. Again, he did this in his previous series. Both Friend's internal motivations come across as incredibly shallow in comparison to these other series. The answers given to us in 20th Century Boys are not enough to make them compelling characters in their own right. Fukube, thankfully, does have a relatively okay characterization, which can make an interesting journey, but I cannot say the same for Katsumata. I still see in a lot of reviews though, people including comments that Friend is this great character. Again, these are always without context or explanation, trying to stay spoiler free. so I can't tell you where these opinions are coming from. My explanation is that I think people build up Friend as more than he actually is in the series, and that's because Urasawa doesn't give you everything to understand his characters, meaning, to a degree, there is some filling in for the reader to do to make everything work in the story. Take Johan's ending in Monster again. Nina says he's doing this perfect suicide by killing off everyone who knew him, and then he doesn't do that, and I describe it as a red herring because it doesn't make sense otherwise. This is me trying to fill in the gaps that the series leaves open. It's much the same for 20th Century Boys, and this leads to some really awkward takes from people. Going through other reviews for this series, I found this absolute Steven of a line. Listen to this. Each of the characters are also shades of grey. No one is good or necessarily evil. No one is necessarily evil? Did you read the series? Friend attempted to kill 99% of the world's population for essentially just the attention. How do you not consider him evil? What are you talking about? You're welcome, encouraged even, to pull your own conclusions from stories, but you know, if you're making bold calls like this, support them. You can't just say Friend is more CN than NE without explaining why you think that way. Give us some sort of defense about how you think his childhood bullying was to such an extent that it changed his morals. A change so significant that it removed his agency in choosing a better option than blowing up the planet. That's not to say everyone else is wrong and I'm some enlightened being reading stories in the fifth dimension, having all the canon answers. Only that we shouldn't claim a character as something that they're never shown to be. Or at the very least, explain why we've come to the conclusions that we have. It's reviews like this that paint the series as something that it's not, and I assume people are genuine when they write these, so please, how did you get to this conclusion? I worry for people who read reviews like these and then come into the series expecting something else, and then they lose interest in the story because it doesn't deliver. Let's get back on track. Let's talk about our two friends. For a quick bit of context, let's give a recap of who did what. Katsumata was the original Friend before Fukube joined. Fukube was in the same cult as Pierre before he moved to join the Friend cult. Fukube was also the one who seduced Kiriko and fathered Kana, though Katsumata does say he did some experimenting around that birth. The main plans of Friend are most likely a mix of both characters, recreating things from both books of prophecy. The Fukube in the Bloody New Year's Eve was most likely actually Katsumata the whole time. Then it's unclear which Friend is running Japan up until Fukube dies. Most likely it was Fukube himself, but we don't know. The expo being recreated suggests Fukube, but honestly, still vague. Then it's all Katsumata, of course, after the resurrection. Let's crack into each one. Fukube, first Friend. Fukube is a weird kid. At the start of the End of the World arc, we break right into the chapters about his backstory. We learn that he is desperate to be known, to be discussed, to be important. See how he reacts when the class starts talking about the expo, the idea that he started. It means everything to him, starting this lifelong obsession with the expo. Long live the expo, long live the expo. He builds this whole story that he'll go to the expo and be the guide for everyone else. Everyone will be amazed by the things that he shows them. Then he doesn't get to go. This is the lie of 1970. He hid all through the summer wearing Sada's mask when he needed to go out. And then he tries to make his own fun by putting up a Teru Teru Bozu in the house on the hanging hill. Which works. People start freaking out and Fukube is loving it. Especially when he hears that Kenji is talking about it too. Then Kenji comes around to invite him along with the gang to go and check it out. Fukube is stuck with choosing between sticking to his lie of being at the expo and going with Kenji, and he really wants to see Kenji freak out from something that he did. Fukube needs people to react to him. It's this core part of his personality. Look, someone look at me, someone be shocked, someone scream, run around in terror. So they all go to the house on the hanging hill and Fukube gets Sadakio to wiggle the ghost around to scare everyone, and it doesn't work. Fukube built up another narrative in his head that didn't pan out, like the expo, like when he invited Kenji and Ko to read manga at his house, and he can't stand it. Fukube needs to be right, for the images, the scenarios, the worlds he creates to be real. Running at the same time through the 1970 flashback, we see Fukube is struggling with what we lovingly refer to as egghead. This is where Fukube's characterization honestly starts to lose me a bit. This is clearly an overtly symbolic image. However, it does blur the line with some of the magic ideas, because it's not just Fukube who sees himself like this. Sada reacts to it, as does the couple in the Hanging Hill. Furthermore, it might even build into the reason why Fukube was so quickly forgotten by the rest of the gang. There is something literal going on as well. Again, the magic hurting the intended characterization. As an image, it suggests Fukube is struggling with identity, or more accurately, a lack thereof. He sits in front of the mirror and asks himself, who is he? By the time the flashbacks end, we never see him find a conclusion. What I think this is trying to build is that Fukube's identity, his persona, his value even, is determined by the recognition from others. During 1970, he built a story around the expo to try and find some public value, only to be upstaged by Kenji with the whole Hanging Hill backfiring on him. The incident ends with Fukube standing in front of a cracked mirror asking, "Who are you?" Again, heavily symbolic stuff. Fukube is still struggling without an identity, without a clear view of who he is. Let's jump ahead to 1971 and what happened in the science room. Important to note here is that Sadakio left in 1970, so the one in the mask here is actually Katsumata. Fukube sets up this stunt the year prior, telling Yamane and Katsumata that they'll see a miracle next summer. Then that summer rolls around and Fukube stages his hanging in an attempt to make a faux resurrection. Yes, just like that. This is again Fukube trying to make a reality and have it spread. Someone notice, someone be shocked. He's trying to gain renown by doing something controversial, start a rumor about himself, make himself known. Now this is clearly a trick. When Donkey points this out, Fukube tries to get the other kids to reject him. Fukube can't stand someone calling him a fake. See how he threatened Sadakio the year before, or later on in the pages on the example project. What's really interesting about the 1971 science room is that we never see the conclusion of what happens. The rope slips and Fukube starts dying for real, and that's it, nothing else. Yes, again, it also parallels Yamane killing him in the same science room. While that scene itself is a bit confusing, it ties into the story beautifully. We see the same idea reflected, past, present, and future. If you've been following the main ideas of the story, Fukube's death immediately gets you thinking that he'll find a way to stage a resurrection, setting up this beautifully if you're paying attention. But what happens after this? We know he survives because of the example project idea, plus, he's alive during the main story, right? My assumption is Katsumata ended up helping him down, starting the strength of that friendship, which would lead them to taking over the world together. But who knows? Later on, we get the reveal of the example project. Fukube was set to appear on a televised talent show to spoonbend, but it suggested that he couldn't do it in practice. This caused the TV show to cancel due to Child A. Fukube staunchly refuses to be known as Child A. He says that one day he will execute the example project. He'll kill everyone who calls him a liar or a fraud or teased him. He'll take over the world and kill the people. Again, Fukube refusing for others to think of him as a fraud. He would sooner kill people who think of him that way. Fukube's identity is tied up in the worth that other people put on him. He will do some pretty atrocious things in order to keep it the way that he wants, according to the story that he's trying to write. The whole example project idea honestly feels like a missed opportunity. It's an interesting concept that the story could have taken, but feels more like it was dropped. It comes in much too late, several chapters after the rest of his backstory, as a way to explain some character motivations. But by this point, Fukube is dead and gone. I believe this is included to show the point where Fukube commits to actually doing all the terrible things that he'll go on to do. Though, this would have been much better served being put alongside the rest of the flashbacks around chapter 170. Also, you can't talk about Fukube without the I am Collins speech. This is another key idea around his character. He always felt he was left out, the forgotten or ignored astronaut that didn't walk on the moon. Real quick, again, Urasawa, absolute legend. The metaphor is someone who got so close to the moon but couldn't walk on the surface. Child Fukube getting close to Kenji's group but never being allowed in. Adult Fukube getting so close to achieving his dreams of world president but not reaching it. Carrying these ideas forward so consistently makes this series such a good read. The I am Collins characterization paints a different perspective on Fukube. He is someone that, even as an adult, still gets upset remembering being excluded from Kenji's group. Likewise, the metaphor extends to the context of forgetting who Fukube is. If you asked someone to name astronauts on the Apollo 11, Michael Collins is probably a name they would not know. However, Armstrong and Aldrin, they probably would. Same for Fukube. Sure, he was in the school, but everyone forgets he was there. I think the I am Collins speech is an idea that's great in these early chapters as we guzzle down any clue to friend we can get. But as we go on, it loses some of its luster. We know Fukube had at least two close friends, Yamane and Katsumata. Him and Yamane seem to be on really good terms. He had a gang of his own that was strong enough to last through to the modern day. Friend originally seemed like an outsider, someone others rejected, adding at least something sympathetic about him. A reason why other people might have flocked to him as other outcasts. But no, Fukube had friends but just wanted to be liked by the cool kids, which I think is simply a weaker idea. See how the early chapters make it this emotional thing, whereas the latter chapters it's a matter-of-fact thing. The emotion behind it was lost as the character was developed. I honestly might be missing something here, but I don't think the I am Collins speech works as well with how the later stage Fukube is explained. Also, we can't bail out by saying that this was Katsumata's speech either, because Fukube uses it right before he dies. So we might say it applies to both friends, but definitely at least Fukube on his own. Let's talk about Fukube's plan. Would he have destroyed the world? I don't think so. When Katsumata pitches the anti-proton bomb idea, Fukube shuts it down, saying he just doesn't get it. He wants to be known, he needs people around to appreciate him, to acknowledge him. The end result of the new Book of Prophecy, with the world president, is a lot more in line with how Fukube has been characterized. I split Friend's plans between the Books of Prophecy. Fukube is more concerned with the new Book of Prophecy, the one that he wrote and the one that ends with him controlling the world. So this whole middle section is Fukube Friend. The original Book of Prophecy is really playing around with Kenji. Combined that with other clues, this all seems like Katsumata Friend. The Ends of the World chapters being mostly Katsumata Friend as well, bar a few allusions to the Expo which don't really make sense for Katsumata's character. So Fukube's plan, it revolves around the new Book of Prophecy. He needed to recreate it. His intention to become world president based around the story that he made. That's the dream for Fukube, complete control over how people view him. If he feels like he has no agency in his own identity, that it's purely based on how others see him, he'll force them to see him the way that he wants, as the hero of the world. As for the content of the new Book of Prophecy itself, we're not going to try and explain it. I honestly think you'd have a hard time trying to justify why things are in there. Things like this Shinjuku church assassination, when that place holds no meaning to any of the childhood characters. Or the Holy Mother descending, which is just really strange terminology that is never elaborated on. Honestly, I think that one is a retroactive that's meant to give a reason why Fukube would get Kiriko pregnant. That whole relationship is never really developed. Anyways, we never get to learn what Fukube's end game was going to be, how he intended to gain control of the world without actually dying. Though it could be considered that it was the plan all along. Let someone else who just looks like him die so he could later stage his own resurrection. No one noticed when Katsumata did it, so Fukube easily could have done the same thing. From then on, it would just be smooth sailing, living the life he'd always dreamed of. The last thing we'll talk about on Fukube is the mystery. Could you have figured out it was Fukube? I think you could make a good guess. We know Friend was someone who went to school with Kenji. This is one of the first clues that we get from Cho. We know Friend isn't Yosh or Maruo from an early flashback. We're pretty sure it's not Mon or Conchi, since we know they weren't in the science room. We know it's not Yuki because Friend fathered Kana, and we know it's not Ocho because we see him in prison. Of the main cast, that leaves us with Sadakio and Fukube. Sada we get confirmation isn't Friend when he talks to Kazumi, as well as the stuff in the VA. So yeah, you might have a good idea that it actually is Fukube, somehow not dead. There's also the clue that he never visually shows up in a flashback. The only time we see childhood Fukube before his reveal as Friend is in the virtual attraction. And this is honestly very well done. We're treated to a lot of flashbacks in the series that they start to blur together a bit. As you're reading, you might convince yourself that Fukube did show up in a real flashback, but no, he doesn't. It's only in the VA. It's another way the flashback mechanic expanding with the VA is such a masterful choice. It facilitates so much good stuff in this series. After Fukube is shot, the gang also talk about how his real name is Hattori, and this one is a pretty obscure clue. To my understanding, Fukube and Hattori can be written with the same kanji, though it's a pretty non-standard use of the kanji, so for us English readers, this really isn't a clue. It's another one of those times that we wish we were fluent in Japanese so we could read the original. Overall, I think Fukube has some really good qualities to set him up as an antagonist. I still can't say he's as compelling as the villains in other Urasawa stories, but he does represent some of the key ideas of 20th Century Boys. He makes for an interesting antagonist that serves the series well, if a bit underdeveloped for what the series made us expect. His history giving us enough to at least try and understand his motivations. However, it's just as we get the backstory support that we've been waiting for, that he's thrown out and replaced by Katsumata for the last part of the series. I assume Naoki Urasawa actually didn't like Fukube as friend. Now I don't have confirmation on that, but we'll get to it soon. Katsumata, second friend, or actually, Katsumata is... yeah, there's really no other way to put this. He's just a worse Fukube. All the interesting history and pieces of information we got explaining Fukube's backstory, it's completely gone with Katsumata. We have 3 pieces of information to hold on to. He holds a grudge against Kenji after he took the punishment for Kenji stealing the space badge. He was bullied as being dead afterwards, which was to such an extent the main cast still believed it as adults. And the day Kenji played 20th Century Boy over the intercom, it saved Katsumata from killing himself. So, from a personality stance, we have a lot less support to understand this character. His main motivations come down to only 2 key moments rather than a personality. From a more themey stance, he is again overshadowed by the work already put into Fukube. The ideas of being stuck in your past, imitation, failing to move on with your life. Katsumata doesn't really bring anything new to the table. Fukube had already set up these ideas and actually took them further than Katsumata does by the end of the series. So from these angles, Katsumata feels underwhelming. We can say the same for the plot as well. The problem is, if you haven't been reading closely, it seems like everything was Fukube and then Katsumata just rolls up at the end to take over the role of friend and then chuck in the anti-proton bomb idea. Everything else was set up by Fukube. Katsumata just rolls with what Fukube had already planned. The salesman dropping the virus, the president of the world, the alien attacks, only the expo will remain. That last one is actually pretty telling because Katsumata has no attachment to that place. We see him specifically target it right at the end. It feels like he's just going through with Fukube's plans. So it doesn't really matter who's behind the hood until right at the end when the plans change. Up until then, the friend party is just autopiloting on what feels like Fukube's plans. This is how I viewed it when I first read this series. When I came back to it, I had the same conclusion. It's only after taking an intentionally deeper dive into the series that things finally clicked for me. Maybe I'm just a dummy, but if I've had this reaction, it's pretty likely other people have had the same, making Katsumata seem all the weaker. It didn't need to be Katsumata at all. Anyone could have just ticked the box on all of the plans Fukube had already set into motion. It was only after going through it now that I figured out that this was supposed to be Katsumata. He was here the whole time. He didn't just take over the plot at the end, he was complicit through the whole series. 20th Century Boys does struggle with this transition between friends. After Fukube dies, we get glimpses of people seeing him again. Yes, that's Katsumata with plastic surgery, but at the time, we didn't know that. During these chapters, we're building up to Friend's resurrection, suggesting friend Fukube is coming back. After the resurrection, the end of the world chapters start with Fukube's backstory too, again suggesting Fukube's return. Takazu talks about Friend researching immortality, cloning, brain transplants, things like that. So the series is keeping our focus on this dead character instead of taking the time to develop the new one. I assume keeping the focus on Fukube is supposed to facilitate the twist of the gang realizing that it's not Fukube in the friend mask anymore, but that's not a strong twist. Either it's not Fukube and someone else has taken over the role, or Fukube literally found a way to resurrect himself. One of those is a big twist, and it's not the one the series goes for. Admittedly, for its benefit, literal resurrection would have been a hard one to justify, but continuing to build up Fukube hinders more than it helps, eventually confirming that he's been replaced by another character that we don't know or get many answers to. One of the key moments is when Kana takes him hostage. We've just learned that this isn't Fukube, but someone connected to him for a long time. Friend Katsumata talks about how the Expo will remain once all civilizations fall. This is one of those things that muddies around what we're supposed to understand about Katsumata. Katsumata has no attachment to the Expo. He actively attacks it right at the end. He has no intention to save it. It's even where he hid his anti-proton bomb. It is literally the first place to go when all civilizations fall. So why does he talk about it with such reverence? We see this with the vaccine deployment as well. Those that went to the Expo have priority in getting the vaccine. Again, reinforcing this idea of the Expo being something important to this friend. Or he's just going along with what Fukube had already planned. My take has always been that Katsumata is kind of part Fukube at this point in the story. The opening chapters are Fukube's backstory. We learn that in-world, it was all from something like the VA, which is a reconstruction of his childhood memories. Katsumata is plugged into it, for some reason experiencing Fukube's history. Though this is set up different to the VA though, he's noded in rather than a VR headset. And this is where the awkward magic from 21st Century Boys comes in. We know the VA can store an uploaded consciousness. With all the talk of researching immortality, it seems like this whole procedure is Katsumata downloading Fukube's memories, and with it, perhaps some of his consciousness. Then again, I might just be making mountains out of molehills on this line. But why include this whole bit around the Expo if it doesn't actually make sense? Is this just an elaborate bluff to Kana, a person you just showed you have zero concern for and were about to kill? It's misdirecting the reader, but that's probably not the best call when you're running out of time to try and make this other friend an interesting villain. The parallels between both friends keep coming though. This is yet another character from Kenji's childhood that was forgotten. At first it was Fukube, then it was Sadakio, and now it's Katsumata. Is this a nice build from the series, or its own internally created cliché? To the series' credit, it has done a great job of making you aware of this character through the story. Infrequently enough, we're reminded of this creepy Katsumata who still haunts the science room. So when his name is dropped at the end, we know who this is supposed to be. However, this is a harder reveal to land from being yet another character who the main cast conveniently forgot about until the moment it became relevant. And that can be a big ask, especially after these characters have spent in-universe 21 years trying to figure out who Friend is. Surely, at some point, one of them would have remembered that this Katsumata that they keep mentioning was actually alive. Especially Yoshitsune, when he goes into the virtual attraction, he hears the kids talking about Katsumata, but still doesn't piece it together that he never died. Perhaps we could say that he's imitating being forgotten. Katsumata does tie back into this idea of imitation once again. Another idea repeated. The people who will rule the world are the imitations of the imitations. Personally, I've never found this a strong idea, because it's not really a concept the story plays with until trying to explain Katsumata. Yes, you can find the imitation ties through the series, like the Books of Prophecy, but there's not a lot of strong ones to find after that. It's an interesting concept that's brought up, but never really explored. More 21st Century Boys trying to play it up as something that should have been important the whole time. So again, Katsumata is just left feeling the weaker for it. Then we come to the moment of Kenji with young Katsumata in the VA. Kenji pulls off his mask to see the egghead underneath. Where's that clip?
This is nitpicky, but little gaps of continuity like this do contribute to a feeling of inauthenticity. Nitpicks are real and they do matter. You don't want nits, do you? If left unattended, they're gonna hatch into lice. Story lice.
So Egghead is this overtly symbolic exploration of Fukube's lack of identity, his internal struggle for recognition to define who he is. The cruel reality that he believes his worth is based around what others perceive. All that beautiful imagery and subtext is just completely gone here. We're now in the VA, meaning either this Katsumata chose to have this face, or more likely in my opinion, he doesn't have one in here. So we know the VA needs photos of the child to build the image in the VA. Katsumata is another character left out of history like Sadakio was. We know Sadakio had to use his adult face in the VA because there was no visual record of his childhood self. So it suggests the same for Katsumata, that there are no photos of him either. Neither can he use his adult face in the attraction because, well, it looks like Fukube now. So without photos, his model in the VA has no face. What once was some nice symbolism looking into a tortured identity of a character is now gone. Egghead is no longer a symbolic thing, but a world thing. Going into his history, we can find a bit about what makes him tick. The main piece of history with the Badge of Justice is a good bit of character building. The symbol of justice, the space badge, is also really good symbolism in the story, if a little on the nose. A big part of Katsumata's rant to Kenji at the end is that Kenji should not be seen as a moral character. He's not a hero of justice. He has no right to wear the space badge, all harkening back to this original theft and letting someone else cop the blame. This extends into how Friend's regime has painted Kenji, turning him into an international villain, i.e. the whole deal around the bloody New Year's Eve. Again, blowing this small thing from childhood into a global stake. The problem is, when I call it a good bit of character building, it's almost all that we get for Katsumata. All of the motivations stem back to just 2 moments, and the series kind of shoots itself in the leg with this one. Mainly because the motivation itself doesn't pair with Katsumata's actions. So Katsumata's whole life revolves around this moment of copping the blame for Kenji stealing the space badge. It was after this that he was considered dead and became an outcast, bullying to such an extent that it led him to the roof. Bullying to such an extent all of the other characters believed him dead all of these years later. Bullying to such an extent that he never recovered from it. It all comes back to this moment. Kenji stole the space badge and Katsumata took the blame. But the backstory keeps going. The whole idea of him dying comes from Fukube. The one who started the bullying was Fukube. Yes, Kenji made the inciting incident with the badge, but Fukube is the one who quote-unquote kills Katsumata in the eyes of the school. And this breaks the motivation. Why does Katsumata hold this life-altering grudge against Kenji and not Fukube? From what the series shows us, all this hate should be aimed at Fukube instead. He was the one who really did all of the damage that Katsumata is looking to get vengeance on. So, to make this work, we have to understand that Katsumata doesn't really care about any past grudges. It's not about some deep-seated pain that defined his life. It all comes down to the fact he had nothing else going on after the roof, and he just figured he'd play a game with Kenji. That he doesn't really care about that moment anymore, choosing to work with Fukube instead of against him. Maybe he had some long-term plan to kill Fukube off to stage the resurrection, but he seems like he doesn't know what to do after Fukube dies, which is strange if it was all part of this long-term plan. I just don't know. And that's really the big problem with Katsumata. We just don't know. We don't know this character. We're left struggling, making mountains out of molehills to try and understand who this person is. And for who's intended to be the villain of 20th Century Boys, that's not good. When people say the Katsumata reveal ruined the series for them, I can honestly believe it. One of the most compelling things about this series, possibly the #1 thing reviews will always mention, is the mystery of who is Friend. This is the final payoff of our investment. This is the end result of what's lauded as one of the best aspects of this series. While for some it's going to be an, oh wow, I wonder how I could have seen that through the series kind of reveal, for others it's a slap in the face after investing their time into 265 chapters, only to have this limp noodle of a character at the end of it all. If it was a head-to-head between both characters, Fukube wins hands down. He's got a stronger backstory, a better connection to the characters, and is more impactful to the story in both plot and chapter count. Man, it would really suck if Fukube wasn't actually in this story at all. Much like 20th Century Boys itself, this video has also been building to a big twist. Final reveals are part of the reason why I've had to break the ending discussion into 2 parts. Katsumata, second friend, or actually, I assume Naoki Urasawa actually didn't like Fukube as friend, but what happens after this? We know he survives because of the example project idea, plus, you know, he's alive during the main story, right? This is friend. Well, one of them at least. Well, actually, most of the changes, whatever and however many they may be in the Perfect Edition, we are not looking at today. Though, that Complete Edition also does something that I'm honestly shocked more people aren't talking about. Why did I call Fukube Fukube through the whole second section and Katsumata friend? Well, what if Fukube was never friend? The video thus far has been built upon the original edition of the series, the ending that came out in 2007. With the complete edition of the series also came a new ending with the twist you've probably figured out by now. It was Katsumata all along. Now, I do have to preface this whole section by saying I haven't actually read the new ending. Between Urasawa's distaste for digital versions, me ordering the hard copy, waiting the weeks it takes to ship here, the order being lost, my country going back into lockdown, trying to cancel the order, trying to redo the order, TLDR, I haven't got my copy yet. So there's this caution sign in the corner because this is all based off secondhand knowledge, which I can't confirm until I get my hands on the book. Please take this whole section with a grain of salt. This is more me pulling together the bits and pieces of hearsay around the place to figure out what happens. Thank you folks in the Prophecies video for giving me confirmations as well, that has been great, and when I finally get to read it, I will put out an update on what the new ending includes. Look for a pinned comment which will point out whether this is correct or not. So yes, the complete edition of the series also brought an entirely new ending, and for some reason, no one has been talking about it. It's a massive change. All those rumors about Sadakio dying in middle school, high school, that was Fukube that died. Friend, every friend, has been Katsumata. Now, quick second opinion to make sure I'm not just talking random Reddit threads as the truth. Well, the movies follow the same reveal, that it was Katsumata all along, that Fukube had been dead for years. Is this a good change in theory? In the dulcet tones of Ross McIntyre,
well, I wrote a little song about it. No.
Not at all. In the friend section, we talked about how Katsumata is a really weak friend. Between him and Fukube, he doesn't stack up in almost every category. So having it as Katsumata the whole time is going to need some heavy-duty support to make it work. The problem is, from my understanding, the changes are only in this final volume, or 21st Century Boys. Everything else stays the same. From the looks of things, the last chapter still goes through the same main plot beats though. The anti-proton bomb, the UN coming in, the robot comes back, so that doesn't leave us much time to support this change. It's a neat twist, but in my opinion, a bad one. The series spends far more time setting up Fukube as friend, exploring his past in the lies of 1970 and 71, or the Example Project. We understand more about this character. We also can understand the main plans of the series being split between two friends. Why there's such a disconnect between how Friend acts leading up to the bloody New Year's Eve and his plans to become world leader. Having Fukube ripped away from us at the last second needs something strong to replace him, and Katsumata does not fit that bill. We don't even start getting the background of Katsumata until chapter 230 when we finally get a small slice. So yeah, it's a no from me, thanks. I think I'll be sticking to the original version as my canon, I guess. Though there are some upsides as well, moments like Friend's supposed death in the science room or riding up on Kenji during the bloody New Year's Eve make a lot more sense if it was all in Katsumata's long-term plan, if it was Katsumata all along. Though other moments do suffer as a result, like the whole focus around the expo, something that was never significant to Katsumata, turning what was key characterization of Friend into a confusing mess. This was all apparently Katsumata playing with Kenji, making him think that Friend was someone else. It's this trade-off between strengthening some moments while weakening others. Overall, I still don't think it's a good choice because Katsumata is never given a strong enough motivation to tie it all together. I assume it ends with the movie's ending, which I do like. It's Kenji and Katsumata on the roof again. Kenji is trying to write a song, but is struggling with a certain part. He starts playing when Katsumata pitches some lyrics. Gouda Lala, Suda Lala. This is a great twist, even making it to the cover of the book. Bob Lennon was co-wrote by Katsumata. This finally gives us the context for why Kenji doesn't play Bob Lennon at the end of the series. This is why Katsumata asks Kenji to play it for him while he dies. It makes this moment a lot more impactful. Katsumata reminiscing back to a time when they were friends. Kenji has all his memories back by this point and knows that this was the song that Katsumata basically co-wrote. That becomes the last time Bob Lennon is played, dying alongside its owner, Katsumata. That's really all I can say at the moment on the new ending. From my understanding, there's not a huge amount that was changed, besides, the fact that Fukube was dead. Apparently, even that is not focused on, so yeah, I can't wait until my copy finally arrives so I can get into it. Look for a card here if I've got the update out, and let us know in the comments if this was the version that you read, particularly around how it affected the series for you. I'm really curious to see if people have a different opinion on the series depending on which ending they read first. Does the new ending tend itself to people enjoying the series more or less? I know for me, I fall strongly in the less category, but please let us know. It's time to unleash my honest thoughts on the series overall. Is 20th Century Boys a great series? Yeah, I think it is. It certainly has its problems, but after going through it all with what feels like a fine comb, I appreciate this series more than I did at the start. To be honest, I was never a huge 20th fan to start with. I thought it was a great series, but not to the degree that I see people recommend it as. These reviews out there claiming that it's Urasawa's magnum opus and one of the finest crafted pieces of manga ever. It always felt to me like a series people kind of blindly recommend without talking about why, because you can't really discuss these reasons why without spoilers. But in spoiling things, you do ruin a lot of what makes 20th Century Boys what it is. That surprise of the time jump at chapter 50 is fantastic. I'm so glad that was never spoiled for me. So the recommendations come, it's this amazing series and you should read it, and then that always felt like the end of the discussion. Nothing really substantive about what makes it their favorite series, or why they hold it in such high regard. That's actually a big reason why I made this video and why it's so long. How many times when working on this have I begged for more spoiler reviews out there? Someone not just saying it's a 10 out of 10, but why they think so, or someone explaining why they didn't enjoy the series. Something more than just, the mystery was interesting. I want to hear what people honestly think about this series without having to censor themselves into spoiler-free language. I know there are people out there who really love Katsumata as a character, but for the life of me, I cannot find a single thread explaining why. So please, comments are open, go nuts. There are a few reviews which go a bit further to discuss around the first 50 chapters or so, which again makes sense, you don't want to spoil too much, but those first 50 chapters are such a different beast from the rest of the series. To me, the first 50 chapters of 20th Century Boys are easily the best that this series gets. While there are fantastic moments both in the story and for the characters later on, as a consistent block, nothing else comes close to the start. So when I read, quote, spoiler reviews of the series that only talk about the first 50 chapters and then the final reveal, it feels wrong. 20th Century Boys isn't just its high points and the final reveal. It's also the assassination in the church plot point that doesn't really make sense or go anywhere. It's the slip-up and stumbles in 21st Century Boys. It's the world that struggles to balance being realistic while also facilitating the plot that Urasawa wants. Then it's also seeing Yosh recreate the secret base with his childhood self, Yukiji and Kana eating noodles with all of this subtext behind the conversation. It's Kana getting Kenji's hat when he comes back and the emotional breakdown. Like any series, it has its high points and its low points. For me, they balanced out to being a great series, but not one that dethrones my personal top Urasawa stories. As far as those stories go, I would still consider Monster as the strongest story overall, and Billy Bat as the more enjoyable reread for me. That's definitely a personal thing. I don't think many people would claim Billy Bat is objectively better than 20th Century Boys. I can understand why people hold 20th Century Boys so highly though. I think 20th has the strongest opening of all the big Urasawa stories. Those first 50 chapters are genuinely fantastic, and that alone is enough to make some people diehard fans of this series, and I completely understand that. It's certainly a bizarre thing when talking about Urasawa stories though. 20th Century Boys claims a strong third place for me, but Urasawa stories are of such a high quality that doesn't really mean too much. This story is still a lot more compelling than other mysteries out there. There is something that 20th Century Boys does better than all of those other stories though, and that is the characters. For me, I think out of all of these big stories, this series has the best selection of characters, both in scope and depth. I would consider individual characters from other series stronger, take Johan or Bonaparte from Monster, or Kevin Goodman and Timmy from Billy Bat. As a holistic cast, 20th Century Boys takes the cake. I can tell you so much more about all of these people than most of the supporting cast of those other series. Kiryon, Mon and Ocho, Yukiji and Conchi, Yoshitsune is an MVP. Urasawa did a great job of setting them all up. Their childhood history coming through into their lives, both pre and post Bloody New Year's Eve. I would be surprised if you went through the series without relating to at least one of them. From good qualities we want, like determination, strength of spirit, taking leadership, working to fix your past mistakes, good memories like bonding with your friends, finding a new talent and celebrating the good times, to bad qualities we regret like cowardice, despair, powerlessness, painful memories like being left alone, infidelity, missing the important moments, or heck, even a rooftop moment like Katsumata. There is just so much to get yourself invested into. Yeah, these characters they take the cake. So why do I think 20th Century Boys overall doesn't rise to the heights of Monster? Well, if I had to sum it up in 3 points, it would be a weak villain, diminishing returns, and it simply runs too long. I'm going to admit this right at the start of this section. I might just not get Friend. It might be that Friend is just some blind spot in how I approach media, so he doesn't really make sense to me. But Friend is not an interesting character. He's a compelling mystery, an interesting foil, a thematically appropriate villain, a theoretically perfect antagonist. But he's not a good character. And that's something that I do really care about with my villains. Having a thematic connection is all well and good, but if their motivations are weak, then I'm going to very quickly lose interest. The build-up of Fukube is great. Getting his backstory lets us understand everything that has happened. The twist reveal recontextualized things really well. And then we get the Katsumata reveal, and besides the twist that he was alive all along, it feels flat. Katsumata always felt like the weaker friend, which is why I'm really curious to see how the new ending tries to justify it being him all along. Katsumata, especially after going through the series like this, is still just a limp noodle of a villain. His motivations coming down to just 2 moments in his childhood made him feel trivial. You could try and say the same for Fukube, but we see a lot more from his perspective, so we get an idea of his character greater than just the moments that he's in. We've got this whole egghead thing and how he builds these narratives in his head, and then when he freaks out when they don't come true. Katsumata's moments are a nice setup for the whole justice angle and to bring 20th Century Boy the song back in, but he absolutely should have hated Fukube for this moment, and we should have seen something to that effect. The mystery of Friend through this series is amazing. It's one of the best things about this series. For me, once you've finished a series, that mystery is only as strong as its conclusion. And the conclusion with Katsumata is bad. There's not enough answers. But my only issues don't lie on just the ending. Friend struggled for me by being a character that's supposed to be imposing while also seemingly having the blind support of the author. So many people flock to Friend and are willing to do crazy things for him, and we never get an explanation of why. He does all these incredibly suspect things and the world just goes along with it. He gains all this power out of nowhere and we're just told to accept it. He's not menacing, he's just supported by the author. It made Friend never feel like a scary threat on his own. Let me put it another way. The Friend party is the real villain of the series. Friend himself doesn't do much. It's all his lackeys doing all the hard yards. So the real threat is this nebulous idea of the Friend political party, or cabal, or whatever they are. And much like Katsumata, this is never explored either. The end result being the series never has a strong developed villain at the center. Yet the main focus remains on the villain, who is Friend. It makes the series feel like the heroes against the world, which completely goes against the central premise of unmasking Friend. Speaking of the world, as a big fan of good world building and seeing how an established world reacts to the story beats, I don't think 20th Century Boys does an overly great job in that regard. I mentioned this right at the start, but let me say it again for those taking this a piece at a time. The world within each time skip is really interesting and has a lot going for it. It's not all bad. However, it's things like Friend being overtly suspect in the Book of Prophecy only to be beloved after the time skip, or the fact that the world just seems to roll over and take the L when Friend spills the beans on his schemes, the fanatical fans that burn their friends alive or laugh when guns are pointed at their head. The answers we get for these are few and far between. I don't think they're enough to support the world that we get. A pet peeve I have in series is when there's these big global problems and they don't get a big global response. Again, this works to undermine how sinister Friend is supposed to be. The series tries quite hard to build Friend as the sinister figure, but the world runs counter to that. Everything Friend wants, he gets, seemingly without having to put much work into it. I will bring up this point again. The series goes too hard. It opens up a lot of threads that make up this fantastic mystery. It's so good, and then as it goes on, it becomes harder to juggle. The top quality that the early chapters establish take their gradual decline until the end of the series. It starts slowly, some threads start dropping, some more convenience starts popping up, and some things that just don't really work, and then the main threat is wrapped up, and we need to find a way to raise the stakes, which somehow actually works. It's one of the best moments of the series. And then we keep going, it's a bit shakier, and then we do it again. The main threat is wrapped up, and we need to find a way to raise the stakes, only this time, it doesn't really work. The series has been going on for too long, and we're just retreading the same ground now. 21st Century Boys, as it stood in the original, was honestly just a very weak conclusion. It hurt to see a series that I've enjoyed so much struggle to hit its final beats. 21st Century Boys is easily the worst that this series gets. It's like the leftovers of an amazing meal you've had, but it's been in the fridge for too long. Sure, it looks like the beautiful thing you ate, but it's not the same. The final plot of the anti-proton bomb and the robot coming back is just a blatant moving of the goalpost. Friend was dead. The gang could go in and make sure the virus didn't get released, and then we could spend the rest of the series exploring Katsumata. Instead, we get another Robot Rumble, quickly setting up and solving the anti-proton bomb idea, and barely touching Katsumata's development. Also, the magic just starts doing whatever it needs to facilitate the plot. You want Kana to send a psychic message to a computer program? Sure, why not? Let's just get it wrapped up. And then of course, it all wraps up with the Katsumata reveal, which, yeah, I think is quite weak. Man, that felt like a lot of complaining. I'm sorry, I still really like this series. 20th Century Boys is still a great series. Where's that clip from the start? Recognizing the flaws in the things we love doesn't need to weaken our appreciation in the series overall. Rather, it helps create a more realistic view of said series for people to draw their own conclusions. That's my intention here today with 20th Century Boys. I want to praise it for the things it does well, but also to discuss its shortcomings. Whether or not these positives outweigh the negatives or vice versa is up to you, but as fans of manga, we shouldn't be afraid to acknowledge the triumphs of series we dislike and the missteps of those that we love. I really think 20th Century Boys is one of those series that needs some more of this online, thus, the past couple hours. Something more than just all these spoiler-free recommendations. There are genuine criticisms to be had that we shouldn't sugarcoat. So the series does have its faults, but it also does some things incredibly well that we shouldn't undersell. All these people were saying that they think it's a masterpiece and the greatest thing they've ever read. It's not without reason. The mystery through the first 2/3 of the series is so engaging. The different clues you get that culminate in the death of Fukube, Maruo's trip to the apartment, which immediately gives you the answer if you've been paying attention. The mystery is developed well in a way where the clues weren't obvious until right at the end, but they're still there nonetheless. There's the flashback mechanic that seamlessly adds depth to the characters while also providing new clues to Friend is fantastic. Urasawa evolving the idea into the virtual attraction was a brilliant move. The art that manages to capture each time jump perfectly, both in the locations and the characters. Some of those chapters around Kiriko's backstory jump through all 4 time zones, and it still works. Even what I'd consider the main message of the series, I love. The concept of criticizing growing older, exploring what that means, what's worth holding onto, how much of our past do we still let define us? How much should we? Who do we want to be? Growing older is fine, just don't get hung up on your past, or do the opposite and completely abandon your roots. The series gets some real emotion too. I love those Kana Yukiji scenes. Sadakio getting the photo, Kiriko gets her message to Kana through the movie cinema, when Kenji gets to hug Kana at the end, seeing it in the film actually oofed me. There's a reason all of my favorite moments are these big emotional moments. Urasawa nails them. These characters are fantastic, and these moments thrive by having well-developed characters. 20th Century Boys has some really high highs that will easily still make this a recommended read from me. Speaking of the movies though, do you need to watch them too? No, you certainly do not. If you're a big fan of the series, I would say they're probably worth your time though. Seeing some of those key scenes elevated with the music and the soundscape completely changed their impact for me. Friend's resurrection? Ooh, that still gives me chills. A few panels turns into this much longer scene, and I think it works so much better. Now whenever I read that scene, in my head I hear this. Or when Kenji hits the crowd with that magical. They also make some changes, which is just interesting to see how they handled it. Like in the final movie, I kid you not, they set up Yosh as Friend. For like half the movie, we're led to believe Yosh is Friend, and it's nuts. They also take some things out, like the assassin guy, but they keep his evil castle in, so look out for how they make that work. Also, just see how close they got the actors to the manga. The cast look good. There is certainly a degree of care here to the manga. But yeah, still ends up as the clearly inferior way of telling the story. While the movie's version of Bob Lennon is very good, I would still consider Mr. Urasawa's version my canon version. I will forever be stoked that he actually did this. It shows such a love for what he creates, writing and learning a song he wrote for a story to jam it in front of a crowd. Love this man. If there's one thing I can leave you with for my take on 20th Century Boys, I'll let it be this scene. You are my daughter, a precious daughter that Kenji left me with. On the bloody New Year's Eve of 2000, he told us, please, just don't die. Now let's eat before the noodles get cold. This is why so much of the series works. I know I've bagged on the world building and the contrivances in the plot, and there will be more to come, but 20th Century Boys always comes back to this. Strong emotional moments between characters we care about and can relate to. I don't want to undersell how amazing these moments are. That is 20th Century Boys. I won't lie, this might be the biggest solo project I have ever worked on, and if you're watching until now, then it has absolutely been worth it. Thank you. Right now, I don't want to commit to doing another one of these for each of the big Urasawa stories, but I'll see what the response to this video is. If that sounds like something you'd be into, then please do let me know. It most likely would be bringing all my thoughts together on Monster into one big video. The channel is still honestly looking for a consistent identity at the moment. So far, I've just kind of been talking about things I want to talk about, but yeah, the YouTube recommendation system super doesn't support that. I do want to focus more on creating what you guys would like to see, rather than just waffling on about whatever I want. It would be good to have those narrowed down to series you're actually interested in, so let me know. For 20th Century Boys, there are a few other things I'd still like to do for it. I definitely need to come back to look at the new ending when I finally get it. Probably a shorter video on the lies of 1970 and 71 to lay out what each of them are/mean. I also do want to tackle the movies in their own video because they are an interesting beast, and then might do a 20th Century Boys story video going through just the plot beats. I've been keeping a second document with the key bits of information in order, so that should be relatively easy to convert into a script. Whether the video ends up like the Johan timeline and relatively straightforward, or like the Shaman King one and full of memes, let me know what your preference is. Finally, I really would like to put out a supplement video to this based around what comes up in the comments. Some more information around anything we didn't put enough focus on, or other perspectives that seem to be common for other fans, as well as for anything that we missed talking about here. The rest of the gang's personal stories, or going deeper with the imitation ideas, or actually bringing up Father Luciano at least once, you know, things like that. I've started noting down the ideas that have already come up from the other 20th Century Boys videos, so if you've got anything you'd like to be added to be talked about, do let me know so I don't miss it. There'll be links to those other channels that we've cut to throughout the video in the description. Can happily recommend all of their channels, they're all folks that I watch. If you're looking for more Urasawa content, there is some up on the channel at the moment. We've got a Monster playlist and a Billy Bat playlist, though Billy was the first thing I worked on here, so it's honestly not great content. I would recommend the Another Monster video. It's actually a pretty good video. I think it's my favorite one on the channel currently. Just don't go into it if you haven't read or seen Monster yet. And if that is the case, I'm sorry for spoiling things about Monster through this video. Apart from that, feel free to leave a comment about your thoughts on 20th Century Boys. I read literally everything that comes my way. Real talk for a moment, one of the main reasons I even started this channel was to have people to talk about these series with. I would genuinely love to hear what your experience is. Favorite moments, pet peeves, most relatable character, whatever, I'll read it all. I've had a few people apologize for leaving long comments on some other videos, but you absolutely don't need to worry. If you want to send a wall of text, I am here for it, and we'll probably just send you a wall back. Also, Twitter's open if you're into that. I check it pretty infrequently just to chat with people. Feel free to say hey. If you've enjoyed the video, consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons as well. It really does help me to see what sort of content I should be making, and well, we'll love to have you here. Finally, thanks for watching. This has been CG, and I will see you Gs in the next one.